honorable guests, respected speakers, ladies and gentlemen, good morning or good afternoon. My name is Nabutal, and I work as a Director of Communication and Outreach for AKADEMIYA2063. We would like, on behalf of the entire Regional Strategic Analysis and Knowledge Support System Conference Committee, to welcome you to this 2020 annual conference. I will give the floor to Dr. Ousmane Badiane, which will be our chairperson for the day. But before that, I'd like to invite my colleague, Nancy Masala, to share a general announcement about the conference. Nancy?
Thank you, Nabu. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
All right, so good morning, good afternoon, everybody, from wherever you're connecting from. My name is Nancy Masala. I'm the Administrative and Events Coordinator at Academia. So for the updates, I would just like to inform you that this session will be recorded and that interpretation is available. You will find the icon for interpretation at the bottom of your screen, and it will be a simultaneous translation. For the French speakers, you are recommended to stick to the French channel. And for the English speakers, kindly stick to the English channel. The interpreters will go from one channel to the other in order to provide the interpretation. Now, regarding the logistics, we advise you to connect with a desktop and to use headphones for a better result of the sound. And we ask speakers to talk with a slow pace in order to allow interpreters to hear what they say and provide the best interpretation possible. If you have questions or comments during the meeting, kindly use the chat box that appears on your screen. If you have a question, kindly start with the word question, then your position, your institution, your name before asking your question. If it is a comment, kindly start your sentence with comment. If you have questions or comments after the conference, you can send us an email at conference@academia.org. If you haven't registered yet for the symposia tomorrow, the link will be provided in the chat box. I believe I covered everything. Just in case I missed out on something, more information will be provided in the chat box or during the conference. Thank you. Back to you, Nabu.
Thank you, Nancy. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Dr. Ousmane Badiane, who is the Executive Chairperson of AKADEMIYA2063. He will give his opening remark, but he will also be our chairperson for the day. Dr. Ousmane, over to you.
Thank you, Nabu. Thank you very much, and welcome to everybody who is joining us this morning. And I will start with my sister, Ambassador Joseph Asako, Commissioner for the Department of Rural Economy and Agriculture of the African Union Commission, who is basically the person and the institution behind the work that RESAX has been carrying out since 2005 under the leadership of institutions then and her own leadership now. So welcome, Ambassador Joseph Asako. It's a pleasure to have you with us. I would also like to welcome Ms. Maura Berry, Senior Deputy Assistant Administrator, United States Agency for International Development, a long-standing partner of RESAX from the very, very early days, continuous without looking back, made an immense contribution to advancing evidence-based policy through our partnership with the African Union around RESAX, mutual accountability, and the likes. So welcome, Ms. Berry. It's a pleasure to have you with us. It's also a special pleasure to introduce Dr. Johan Sweenan and greet and welcome him, Director General of the International Food Policy Research Institute, which has been a huge part of my life. I joined IFPRI 31 years ago and have enjoyed every day and every minute spent there. But this is actually a special occasion as well because IFPRI has really incubated everything we have done for the last 15 years and generously supported us through a perfect transition. So Johan, thank you, and to you and your colleague through you, and welcome to the conference. So this is, I think, the 13th edition, if my memory serves me right, of the annual conference of the Regional Strategic Analysis and Knowledge Support Systems. As I said, RESAX goes back 15, 16 years ago, launched through the partnership of the African Union, the regional economic communities, supported technically by the International Food Policy Research Institute in partnership with CG centers based in Africa. So I'm very pleased, therefore, to welcome our colleagues leading our regional programs, Dr. Joseph Kariukia, Dr. Greenwell Machaya, and Dr. Mbayad, who are here with their team. They have been moving our work on the ground for such a long time. The focus of RESAX has been from the get-go to help the African Union turn into reality its commitment to better policy making, to accountability, to greater review and peer learning and benchmarking and implementing the AKADEMIYA agenda. From the get-go, from the very early days, RESAX was set to be a function within the AKADEMIYA agenda to facilitate access to data and analytics and benchmarking and review processes. It has been doing that over the years through a variety of instruments. The most visible at the continental level is a binary review that is supported by RESAX and its partners in the countries, but also at the country level, the joint sector reviews and a lot of other things. RESAX operates a multitude of platforms for interactive tracking of progress and performance. All of that to facilitate basically how we measure how well we do and how we can correct our directions if we think we can do better. A main product of RESAX every year is the annual Trends and Outlook report, which is presented annually at this conference under the auspices and in partnership with the African Union Commission. The annual Trends and Outlook report is basically the formal CADEP M&A report. We started with compiling indicators, charts, and tables to show how we were doing against individual targets and by individual countries. And it became very clear that just charts and tables are a very good means to communicate. But CADEP is more than that. It is trying to renew policies, strategies, to do things better, to find better ways of doing business. So we introduced featured topics that you now have every year. This year's topic is about policies and public policies to advance agriculture and transformation, economic transformation in Africa. And this is a good time to do it after 2 decades of solid growth, looking back at what policies worked in the past and what policies might be needed in the future is a good moment to reflect on that. We have looked at other thematic areas critical to the Malabo agenda, like gender, like nutrition, like social protection, like trade and climate smart agriculture in the past. So this year, we'd like to focus on policies. So, and I hope that through today and Thursday, you will hear from a very diverse and rich team of authors that have looked into different parts of policy making and sector governance. My colleagues, Danielle Resnick, will be guiding you through what is in the report. So I would like to just say, we are happy that you're here with us. We welcome you, and we look forward to interacting with you over the next 2-3 days around the report, its lessons, its findings, and how we can use it to further improve what we've been doing across Africa over these last 2 decades. Thank you very much. And this would be the time for me as well. As a chairperson of this session, our chair had a last-minute extraordinary summit of his organization. The sales organization West Africa won't be able to join us. So I'm sitting in here for him, and I would like now to welcome Dr. Johan Swinen, Director General of the International Food Policy Research Institute, to make his opening statement.
Thank you very much, Ousmane. Merci beaucoup. Je suis très heureux d'être ici I will give the rest of my presentation in English, but it's great to have this broad participation from across Africa in this conference. Thanks so much for inviting me, and congratulations to you and your colleagues from AKADEMIYA2063 for this excellent organization of the RESACS conference. I find it an honor for me to speak here at the opening ceremony of the conference in the presence of a very distinguished panel. As DG of IFPRI, it is a great pleasure for me to see the continuing success of RESACS and the annual Trends and Outlook report. It was launched today, and I'm sure it's going to have a very wide audience and a lot of interest in the messages in there. For us, for IFPRI, it's a special year for many reasons, as I'm sure it's for all of you. But it's also a special reason because in 2020, we have embarked on a new and what we expect to be as a highly successful partnership with AKADEMIYA2063. Together with AKADEMIYA2063, we believe IFPRI is in a stronger position to implement our mission to provide data, analysis, and evidence-based policy advice, and to support capacity strengthening to many African countries. We hope that this will contribute to enable the African Union member state to achieve poverty reduction, economic transformation, and shared prosperity. The topic of today's conference, or conference of the next few days, and also the title of the annual Trends and Outlook report of this year, could not be more timely. Sustaining Africa's agri-food system transformation, the role of public policies. This is an important topic in any case, but certainly in 2020 with the COVID-19 pandemic, where this is an additional threat to the sustainability of the agri-food system globally and in Africa as well, this is of special importance. As you know, the current agri-food system globally is off track in delivering on reducing hunger and malnutrition. We have roughly 3 billion people on the planet who cannot afford a healthy diet. The number and the share of hungry people is rising again. This after decades of promising reductions in both indicators. And all this is happening while the food system is hitting planetary boundaries as reflected in the interaction with climate change, water use restrictions, etc. Now, all this was happening already, these negative developments, before COVID. COVID is reinforcing the problems and the challenges. However, I think it's important to realize that COVID-19 also provides opportunities, and particularly it may provide opportunities in this policy space. It may provide opportunities for making radical and transformative changes, which otherwise may not be possible. We're talking about changes in how we produce food, how we link food production with consumption through the value chains, and in terms of what we consume. For this, I think it's important to have major changes globally, both in the private sector and in the public sector. We're talking about changes in technology, in the organization of society, the organization of the economy, and in terms of public policies. Technological and organizational changes cannot be successful without appropriate public policies. And these policies should be targeted to make the agri-food system more sustainable, more inclusive as well, to make sure that the poorest among us can benefit from it, and more resilient going forward. So the topic of this conference really addresses all these issues. System transformation, I should mention, is also one of the main themes proposed for the One CGIAR, which is the CGIAR which is currently under reform and setting its research agenda for the next decade. In the report of today, the annual Trends and Outlook report, this report focuses on 5 themes, and I'm going to list them briefly because I think it's really important to give a flavor of what the authors of the report have been focusing on. One is learn from mistakes and achievements. Second, adopt a holistic agenda. Third, embrace nuance or more effective policy targeting. 4, invest in accountable policy systems. 5th, anticipate risks and plans accordingly. I think this is really promising because they all signal an attention to detail, to implementation of policy advice. And I think that is extremely important to provide, as they are part of the puzzle and they provide important elements for successful transformation and policy implementation. So I look very much forward to hearing the details of the presentation of the details of the report and everything, what the discussion afterwards, to see how this can contribute to accelerating Africa's agri-food system transformation. Finally, I should say that I have noticed there are several very good friends and colleagues on the program who I would have loved to meet in person, but obviously that is not possible. But despite this, I do look forward to learn and listen to interesting discussions, exciting discussions. And I wish all of you a wonderful conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sweeney. And again, thank you for all the support IFPRI has given to RESAX over the last 15 years and your generous assistance in a very effective transition from IFPRI to AKADEMIYA2063. It is now my pleasure to welcome Ms. Maura Berry, Senior Deputy Assistant Administrator of the United States Agency for International Development, for her welcoming and opening statement. Ms. Berry, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening. Thank you, first of all, to Her Excellency Josepha Sacco, and also Dr. Osman Badian. It's really a great opportunity to be here with all of you for this annual conference, so thank you. And also thank you to Dr. Johan Swinen and everyone at IFPRI really for all the work that they've done and their long-standing partnership and support of strengthening African capacity. Super important work. I think many of you would have heard USAID talking about its mission to empower self-reliance and resilience in the countries where we work. I think it's something that all of us here support, and USAID has been the last couple of years really driving home what we call the journey to self-reliance. We know that no country can be self-reliant, of course, without locally sustained systems for formulating and implementing sound policy decisions. And I know that we're here over the next couple of days of this conference to really drive that home. We also know that we can only realize this type of vision by working in lockstep with local governments and organizations that are deeply connected to the communities that we are serving. And one of the things I'd like to highlight is USAID's new partnership initiative, which allows us to do just that. We depend on African institutions to collect, analyze, and use evidence in decision-making, which of course is critical to accelerating and protecting our progress towards ending the vicious cycle of poverty and hunger and malnutrition, as well as water insecurity, and particularly the impact that that has on women and youth and other marginalized populations. And so as Dr. Swinen just underscored, of course, we can't ignore what's all in front of us, and that is this ongoing and long-term impact of the COVID pandemic and the impact that it will have and it is having on food systems around the world. And to that end, also noted by Dr. Swinen is, the word opportunity, and I want to acknowledge that there are opportunities in front of us, especially to work towards resilience. And I want to thank all of our new partners across the African continent that are helping us carry forward this very important and urgent work. And in particular, I want to express our support for AKADEMIYA2063. Just in 3 very short months, they're already, I think, a force for evidence-based decision-making and accountability on the continent. And I really just applaud them for that work. And I also look forward to our continued relationship with so many of our African partners across government, civil society, and the private sector, and the opportunity that we have to make progress together. And then lastly, I want to mention how inspired USAID is by the work of CAADP. And we're so honored that we've been able to maintain our partnership since its very inception. And we really value that progress that it's made on evidence-based policy to accelerate inclusive agricultural-led growth progress. And also I want to recognize RESAX for their contributions to the evidence base, including but not limited to, of course, the Agricultural Trends and Outlook report that we're going to be discussing at this conference. And as Dr. Osmani mentioned, we've been a partner since the early days, and we're really excited to continue that partnership with RESACS, and especially at its new home at AKADEMIYA2063. So thank you again for the opportunity to be part of launching this important conference today. And I'm looking forward to an enjoyable and productive conference. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Bori. And I think at AKADEMIYA2063, we will use the investment that's been made both by IFPRI, USAID, and so many other partners to continue the great work that we've been doing in the past. We have two keywords there, catalysts in mobilizing African expertise, local expertise, to be at the forefront of the data and analytics movement in Africa, but also to serve as a bridge between the African science community and the global science community to bring science to use in support of policies and strategies across the continent. So thank you again for the longstanding support. It is now, of course, my pleasure and honor and with great appreciation to welcome Her Excellency Ambassador Josepha Sacco, Commissioner, Department of Rural Economy and Agriculture of the African Union Commission, to give a welcoming statement and open the conference for us. Welcome, Ambassador Sacco.
Good afternoon, every one of you. Good morning, depending where you are. Of this conference, Dr. Ousmane Badiane, Executive Chairperson of the AKADEMIYA2063, Dr. Joan Suimen, DG of IFPRI, Madame Maura Berry, Senior Deputy Assistant Administrator, United States Agency for Development, USAID, dear delegates, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, all protocol duly observed. I extend warm regards to you all from His Excellency Musa Faki Mohammed, Chairperson of the African Union Commission. I am equally delighted to welcome participants to the first edition of a RESACS conference under the leadership of AKADEMIYA2063. Allow me to also congratulate Dr. Ousmane Badiane for the successful launch 2063 in September 2020, provide the expertise we need for the African we all want, the Africa we want, Agenda 2063. I salute the successful transition of the RESACS program from IFPRI to AKADEMIYA2063. Let's also highlight the important role RESAC is playing in supporting mutual accountability on the CADEP. In particular, the biannual review report. In this regard, I thank all partners who made it possible, in particular, IFPRI, represented by its DG, Dr. John Suimen, and the USAID, represented by the Senior Deputy Assistant Administrator, Ms. Maura Berry. The 2020 RESACS conference takes place at a time when COVID-19 pandemic and its impact on food security and livelihood is likely to push additional millions of Africans into extreme poverty and food insecurity. Despite this negative impact, the pandemic has provided us with an opportunity of reflection and readjustment to prioritize, refocus, re-energize, rebuild better and stronger. The road to recovery requires well-coordinated efforts, determination, and purpose guided by a strategic direction defined continent's aspiration espoused in Agenda 2063. We must reiterate our commitment to CAADP and the Agenda 2063 as we look ahead to rebuild after COVID. Of necessity too is building international and domestic partnership alike, as well as inclusive dialogue but through research evidence that critically examines the current policy ecosystem, exposing what is broken and what is in dire needs of fixing in social, economic, political, and environmental contexts. This will guide us in reimagining and rethinking an improved agri-food system policy that is imperative to enhance security of diet-related diseases while increasing resilience to climate change. Let us also celebrate the progress achieved on the CAADP, with Africa leading the world in agriculture sector growth over the last 20 years. We need to re-emphasize the relevance and importance of CAADP agenda, in particular its principle of evidence-based policies. We must continue to stress the importance of improved public policy and agriculture sector governance to ensure continued successful implementation of CAADP and achievement of the ambition of Agenda 2063. Let me conclude by commending RISAC for the production of the annual Trend and Outlook report, which is a key knowledge product that independently monitors and evaluates the implementation of CAADP among member states. I am curious to find out the status of alignment of regional and national agriculture investment plan to the Malabo Declaration. This is particularly crucial as we strive to enhance mutual accountability, including commencement of the third cycle of the BR review report process that kicked off on the 16th October 2020 with the CAADP biannual review task force meeting. I call upon all stakeholders to make it an inclusive and productive process. With no further ado, I would like to officially declare the virtual 2020 Research Conference open. I wish you all fruitful deliberation and thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Ambassador Sako. Thank you for your time and your guidance and your leadership over these years. So we are honored to have you with us, and your message has been taken notice of, and we will respond to the challenge. This is the time now to turn to the 2020 Annual Trends and Outlook Report of the Regional Strategic Analysis and Knowledge Support Systems, which has been led by a team of editors led by Dr. Daniel Resnick, Senior Research Fellow, Development Strategy and Governance Division at IFPRI. So I would like now to welcome her to make her first presentation on the ATOR at this conference. Dr. Resnick, please welcome.
Okay, thank you so much, Usman. Welcome everyone and bienvenue. I have the pleasure to be with all of you today to provide an introduction to this year's African Trends and Outlook Report. And I had the opportunity to co-edit this report with Dr. Xinshen Zhao at IFPRI and Dr. Gatal Tejas at AKADEMIYA2063. And the three of us had the chance to work with more than a dozen experts from the African Economic Research Consortium to ILRI, the World Bank, the University of Bonn, IFPRI, and many others to put this report together. My aim is to just provide you with a brief overview of some of the main themes and messages of the report, and this will hopefully provide a guide as you hear the presentations of each of these experts over the next 3 days. So we'll start with the next slide. And really the motivations for this year's report is the finding that African agriculture really seems to be at a crossroads. On the one hand, we have a number of achievements to be proud of in the region. Over the last decade, we've seen an impressive increase in the share of world ag GDP, Africa's share in world ag GDP increasing. Nominal rates of assistance to farmers have been positive since the 2010s, an impressive change from the previous decades when it was quite a negative trend. Significant improvements in land and labor productivity, as well as predictions that African agribusiness is estimated to be more than $1 trillion market by 2030. Of course, on the other hand, we were hit with the COVID-19 pandemic, but even prior to that, there were a number of shocks in the region, including the locust invasion in East Africa, the fall armyworm, and many other climatic shocks that repeatedly show the vulnerability of agriculture in the region. On top of that, within the last 5 years, we've seen some concerning reversion to some of the failed policies of the past, including a number of government interventions, including mandated harvest dates, price setting, and other restrictions on private traders. Despite a lot of the rhetoric around free trade commitments, we're seeing some countries returning to different trade distortions. And unfortunately, only a handful of countries have met the CAADP goals of 6% agricultural growth, or allocating 10% of their budgets to agriculture and 1% of their GDP to ag R&D. So with this background in mind, we had 4 main questions that kind of guide the report this year. So if we go to the next slide. The first is, how have agricultural policy regimes evolved over the last 2 decades, in order to provide some context to some of the policies that we're seeing today. And Usman, in his next presentation, is going to provide us with quite a detailed overview of the trajectory of agricultural policies in the region. Secondly, are current policies for agri-food system transformation aligned with quite a rapidly changing macroeconomic and global trade environment? Particularly on the macroeconomic side, and as a result of COVID, we know that resources are now more constrained. And that's why this third question about what are the policy gaps that need to be prioritized to sustain and accelerate growth is quite an important one. What do we need to put first, and what are some of the things that may be lower down our list given a more constrained investment setting? And then finally, what are some of the institutional and political economy factors that need to be considered to make agri-food system transformation a reality? Now, we look at all of these questions within an agri-food systems perspective, highlighted in this graphic on the right on your screen. So we take into account some of the interventions on the farm, and particularly with respect to input policies. We look also at a number of the skills and other support mechanisms that smallholders may need. We look at the midstream aspects of the value chain, particularly the processing and retail side. What do micro and small and medium enterprises need? And then finally, on the marketing side, what are some of the issues that we need to take into account, particularly around food safety as we try to reach different consumers? Then on the left-hand side of this framework, you can see that there are a number of enabling environment factors that undergird many of the interventions along the value chain. So this is macroeconomic stability, of course, broad-based infrastructure, having robust legal frameworks, ICT and skills development, accountable political systems, effective cross-sectoral coordination, and of course, there's many more that we could also think about. So this framework guides many of the chapter structure, and so I will use this to orient the rest of my overview right now. So first, if we go to the next slide, we focus on agricultural input policies, issues on the farm that need to be taken into account. And here we look at issues related to seed, fertilizer, mechanization, and irrigation. So African seed systems have developed quite impressively over the last decade. New cultivars have been released, seed companies are playing a larger role, and greater adoption of higher value seeds among farm households. But as David Spielman will discuss, there's still a number of gaps that need to be tackled. We need higher quality seed requiring improved access to genetic material, greater investments in breeding methods, very importantly, enabling regulatory systems that improve the amount of time that's needed to test and release new cultivars, tackling policy gaps around biosafety. We currently have a patchwork of different policies around biosafety in the region, and that needs to be tackled since this is such a cross-boundary issue. And importantly, building public trust related to things like counterfeit seed. Many countries are adopting innovations like mobile scratch cards and barcodes in order to help farmers recognize counterfeit seed. But underlying this is how do you increase citizens and farmers' trust in both government and private sector actors so they can feel confident in the seed that they have. Of course, fertilizer is just as important as seed, and there's been a lot of evidence since the launch of the Abuja Declaration around fertilizer, and then of course, since the food price crisis, which spurred a return to fertilizer input subsidies, that though these programs have been refined over time with new innovations like e-vouchers for targeting, they do not have the anticipated impacts on productivity growth that had been hoped for. And so Gashal Abat is going to talk about some of the other complementary interventions that are needed to increase the productivity of fertilizer, including concurrent investments in agronomy, irrigation, soil testing, extension services, and private sector involvement. On the next slide, we turn to mechanization. And with the growth of medium and large scale farming in the region, there has been increased farming intensity, which has driven up the need for better access to mechanization. As Hiro Takashima will show, though, there has been a major return to government subsidized mechanization programs as a way of catering to mechanization needs. He'll talk about some of the challenges with these subsidized programs with a particular focus on Ghana's AMSEC program and how there may be opportunities for different funding modalities as well as incorporating maintenance and training initiatives into these programs, as this has been seen as one of the major gaps that these mechanization programs didn't cater to the fact that tractors break down, that you need new parts. And so thinking about ways that you can have a more holistic intervention for these programs is quite key. Claudia Ringler is going to focus our attention on irrigation. And the African Union, of course, has a framework around irrigation and water management. That framework recognizes that, of course, across the continent, there are vast biophysical differences that require multiple pathways for irrigation. Dr. Ringler will emphasize that there are some important trade-offs between improving the affordability of irrigation technologies and environmental, health, and even gender goals. And reconciling some of these trade-offs is going to require tools to monitor irrigation, water pollution management systems, water management frameworks, and irrigation that's targeted at more nutrient-dense cultivation. Go to the next slide. We focus going above the farm, thinking about what are other ways to support value chain actors besides just input policies. One is supporting producer organizations, which have long been found to improve smallholders' access to inputs and information. But as Fleur Watosi is going to talk about specifically with reference to Senegal, these organizations vary enormously in their structure. And so just this graphic on Senegal shows the variation in density, but also the types of organizations. She finds in her work with her colleague, Amy Fay, that technical efficiency is higher for those who are involved in producer organizations, but it's especially so for those in organizations that have a board and a general assembly. So this highlights that supporting producer organizations requires attention to some of these governance differences in structure. In addition to producer organizations, skills development is of course key for value chain actors, particularly agricultural, technical, and vocational training. But Olivier Caroux is going to highlight that a lot of this training, first, it's woefully underfunded in Africa, but it also tends to be focused highly on agronomy practices and on-the-farm training. And he will make the case for going beyond that to include mechanical and electrical skills, especially as we think about moving to greater emphasis on the midstream elements of the value chain and agro-processing, but also helping farmers with financing, accounting, insurance, and ICT training to make farming a more competitive business. If we go to the next slide, we highlight two other elements of supporting value chain actors, particularly when we look at this element of processing in the midstream value chains. This is a very promising area, and of course the African Union and CAADP have highlighted the importance of supporting midstream value chains. There's a lot of dynamism in export growth around processing, and of course with rapid urbanization, we're seeing much more food demand around processed foods. This creates opportunities for domestic value chains. But as Gatal Tadesse, with his co-author Usman Badiani, they're going to talk about the range of targeted policies that you need to support these actors, including considering whether they operate in global or regional markets, the level of consumer demand for different commodities, and the specific challenges of micro and small medium enterprises versus large enterprises. So they offer us a six-fold typology of the different range of interventions, depending on where value chain actors sit. Food demand in Africa is also highlighting the need to pay attention to food safety. Africa, along with Asia, unfortunately has the highest burden of foodborne diseases linked to many issues like lack of clean water, close contact with animals, and intensive use of agrochemicals. So Dr. Steve Jaffe and his colleagues have looked at some of the policy interventions needed to tackle these challenges in Africa, including data systems to track food safety issues, mechanisms for accreditation and certification of businesses, and regulatory oversight. Of course, African food markets are very diverse, and so these interventions need to be quite carefully tailored according to whether we're talking about informal wet markets versus modern retail outlets, and even growing e-commerce operations that we're seeing in the continent. If we go to the next slide, we turn to this last element of that graphic I presented to you earlier, which was talking about the enabling environment. And here we have 5 key aspects that we think are quite important to the enabling environment. The first is the role of ICT and digitalization. There's a lot of excitement about ICT, and of course, during the COVID-19 pandemic, we've seen that ICT has been really critical to keeping food supply chains moving. But as Heike Baumüller will show, harnessing the potential of ICT requires attention to some of the unseen things and kind of less exciting things, such as developing policy around ICT, around digital privacy, and around digital literacy. She'll also talk about the need for improved domestic financing for ICT to ensure that these interventions are sustainable even after potentially donor interest in these issues wanes. There's also a lot of excitement about agricultural trade in Africa, especially with the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. There's been a rising share of processed and semi-processed products in Africa's exports. But as Antoine Bouet will highlight, there's a number of reforms that are of course needed to improve intra-regional access to markets. These include reforms to custom procedures, transport and infrastructure, logistics, and phytosanitary standard compliance. It also requires tackling what we're seeing right now with very contradictory policy narratives around free trade, with a lot of excitement about improving trade on the one hand, but also a lot of discussion about the need for national self-sufficiency and food sovereignty. So seeing certain countries increasing their import tariffs as a result of these types of narratives. If we go to the next slide, we highlight three final aspects of the enabling environment. The macroeconomic context has of course been highlighted quite dramatically with the COVID pandemic. But the risk of debt distress in Africa has been on the agenda even prior to the pandemic. As you can see in the graphic on the right, in 2006, we had 18 low-income countries in Africa that were at risk of distress. And then with the HIPC agreement in 2007, we saw a decline in the number of countries
ik zit in een bespreking en ik weet niet zo goed hoe ik die nou
that were experiencing debt distress.
Wat zeg
By 2014, we saw a decline in the number of countries at risk, and now this has increased since then. We now have more than 20 countries at risk. And this very much threatens CAADP's investment goals. It threatens investment goals in a number of domains, even outside of agriculture. And Professor Ndungu is going to highlight the importance of the macro environment and domestic resource mobilization to restore investor confidence. Relatedly, on Thursday, I'll talk about the importance of political economy and how an agri-food system perspective entails a new range of political economy issues across ministries, interest groups, and between rural and urban government authorities. And I'll highlight some of the mechanisms that are needed for improved interministerial, but also multi-level coordination. And finally, John Ulumwengo is going to really emphasize a key aspect of the CAADP process, which has been mutual accountability. He finds with his colleagues that countries that conducted joint sector reviews and biennial reviews, and those that have generally participated in CAADP, have been more likely to devote public expenditures to the ag sector than those that have not. And in turn, finding that those expenditures are associated with higher agricultural productivity gains. And so this is strong affirmation yet again for mechanisms for mutual accountability that CAADP has supported for more than a decade. So to conclude, on the next slide, we just want to emphasize that the expectations right now for agri-food system transformation in Africa are enormous. African agriculture is expected to create jobs, bolster healthy diets, improved environmental sustainability, and ensure gender equality, among many other objectives. And of course, there are trade-offs between these objectives. Creating factories for jobs can have, of course, environmental implications. And so this is going to require strategic prioritization across the food system, along value chains, and between the needs of different constituencies, whether farmers, processors, retailers, and consumers. And so to conclude, the 2020 A-Tour provides 4 guiding principles to inform this prioritization, and Dr. Swinnen alluded to some of these earlier. First and foremost is learning from the past, and Usman will highlight that just now. The importance of not reverting to failed policies of the past, even as we may have a new generation of leaders on the continent. Secondly, adopting a holistic agenda, not just adopting a food systems perspective, but within each of these policy domains, seeing the importance of infrastructure, policy, regulation, and implementation bottlenecks. Third, embracing nuance, whether we're talking about fertilizer, irrigation, producer organizations, food safety, all of these elements need to be properly nuanced depending with the type of retailers, smallholders, biological, biophysical issues that we're dealing with. And finally, strengthening policy systems. We have strong support in the report for the importance of accountability, transparency, and evidence-based policymaking. And so this reaffirms yet again some of the guiding principles that the AU and CAADP have been supporting for many years now. So I'll end there and I'll turn back to you, Usman. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Danielle, for an excellent report, an overview of the report, and also thank you for leading the editors to produce a great report for this year. Thank you very much. So I think now we can go to the presentation of my chapter with Julie Collins and John Ulumwengo, where we're looking at the past, present, and the future of agricultural policy in Africa. So Julie, when you're ready, we can load that. Excuse me. What we've tried to do here is to look at how policies have evolved in Africa and what role they have played in particular in the growth recovery of the last 20 years and how they need to be readjusted, refined, and improved so that we can meet the challenges of rapidly transforming value chains and sustain the recovery into the decades to come and broaden it so it can create wealth and prosperity and change people's livelihood. So in this presentation, I will start with a key message that is really not just transpiring from our chapter, but I would think from the entire report. And then we will look at the recent growth recovery, the role of policies in that recovery, before talking about the characteristics of the policies we need today and tomorrow, and what will be the conditions for creating such good policies before concluding. So we can go to the first slide with the key message. And this really is something I like referring to in terms of the centrality of policies. And this is something that we need to keep in mind all the time, and especially those who are designing policies and implementing them, and who are in charge of national, regional, and continental programs to move the agenda, whether it's the Malabo agenda or the Agenda 2063, or at the country levels, individual programs that are linked to those initiatives. Good policies may not be the solution for everything, that we know. But what we also know is that bad policies are really and truly a problem for everything else. It's important to get policies right. And we are where we are today because better policies have replaced bad policies, assuring an unprecedented, decades-long, broad-based recovery across the continent. Further policy improvement will be required, therefore, to sustain and accelerate the recovery and force economic transformation. This is our key message and takeaway home from the chapter. We can go to the next slide, where we just briefly look at how things have changed over the last 20 years before talking about the role of policies. Many of you who have been following development literature until just about 10 years ago, if you looked at a graph showing agricultural sector growth over time, we are all accustomed to seeing the line representing Africa to be at the bottom and nearly flat. That has been reversed completely over the last 20 years. African agriculture has shown the fastest growth of any region on the globe, and that is the top line. And that distance is increasing over time. So African agriculture has turned the page, turned the corner in the last 20 years. You look at yield growth as well. You have now land productivity growth, whether it's labor productivity or land productivity, sorry. You have growth rates of 2 to 4% over the last, this decade. So these are truly dramatically different numbers from what we knew just a couple of decades earlier. And the role of policy in that is going to be an important way of figuring out how do we continue to maintain and sustain this performance. Next slide, please. And I'm going to spend a little bit of time here really to talk about this. If you look at the bottom of the graph, where I just had a smaller version of the one we looked at before that showed African agriculture performing better than other regions, it's a very tiny fraction of the last 60 years of economic growth story in Africa. It is basically between those two red dots, that part of the graph. That's where we are today. But if you look back to your left, you see between the end of the 60s to the end of the 80s, a very dramatic decline and stagnation of agricultural growth in Africa. This has been very painful for the African economies. Through these 2 decades, which I refer to often as the lost decades, we got an exponential increase of poverty and hunger and malnourished people across the continent. We're still dealing with that today. So while we can celebrate the very strong growth over the last 20 years, looking at the blue line compared to the one on the top, the dotted line, which have been the way we would be today if we had maintained the trajectory that we were on in the 60s. If you continue the growth rate of the 60s and follow that dotted line and did not have lost and would not have lost those 2 decades, we will be by 2025 achieving a per capita income of 1,135. Instead, we're going to be at 790 if we assume continuation of the current trajectory where we are. Obviously, this is good, but we cannot be happy with it. We need to do better. Just to catch up by 2025, we would need to almost triple the growth rate of agriculture from 1.2 currently to 3.8. So therefore, knowing what we did right and what we can do better is going to be extremely important. So we go to the next slide. So how did we get to where we are today? We are here because we had better managed macro policies, in particular exchange rate policies, more sustainable fiscal deficit, to manage lower inflation in the African economies, to reduce market interference, to create room and reduce the bias against farmers and the private sector in agriculture, and to increase public investment and its effectiveness. All these things are not magic. They're things we know how we've done them, and they're things we need to refine as we move into the future. Next slide, please. If you look at all the different policies around agriculture and the economy, we don't have time to go through each one of those that I listed, but if those are done right, what you will see is what we have in this graph. The graph is showing basically how well policies are aligned with the needs of a sector. In other words, how much policies are taxing or assisting a given sector. If you are under the straight line, the 0 line, policies all taken together cumulatively are putting a heavy burden on that sector. And you see in the green line at the bottom that agriculture has been heavily, implicitly under supported or taxed or put under a heavy burden from the 60s all the way to the end of the 80s. That has delayed growth in agriculture. It changed again. At the same time, the red line on the top showed that countries did favor non-agricultural sector through different vehicles. There's no time to go through that now, but suffice it to say that we had a system where agriculture was being burdened and non-agriculture was being supported. And that has changed so much so that toward the end of the 2010s, you see that those 2 lines are converging. That convergence, thus reduction and creating of a more neutral environment around agriculture is the translation, the illustration of the improved policy environment that has helped generate the recovery that we have. We have in the chapter, if you look at the next slide, looked at the role of the individual policy environment around agriculture, their role in agricultural performance and agricultural growth. Here we look at per capita GDP growth and how it has been affected by an improvement in the support to agriculture. RRA stands for relative rate of assistance to agriculture versus non-agriculture. So the more you are treating agriculture less poorly, the better you will have growth in the agricultural sector. I would like you to look at first the RRA, where the relative rate of assistance for agriculture, looking at in the past, would have created an expected per capita GDP of about $1,112. If you do right by agriculture and you add, look at the role that macro policies played and the role that human capital played, you see that there's no addition beyond what the assistance to agriculture did. In other words, agricultural policies were not being supported were not being enhanced and strengthened by human capital policies and by macroeconomic policies. And you'll hear that when Professor Njuguna talks about the macroeconomic environment and how much it needs to be improved. And you'll hear that also when we talk about skills development and in other things. So in the past, we didn't have that kind of synthetic, that synergy between macro policies, human capital, and agriculture policy. On the other hand, foreign aid and the quality of institution in particular have added to the potency of agricultural sector policy and policies in general. So the role of policies here in the growth process are explained or illustrated by the level of expected GDP of 1,000 that can be explained by the relative rate of assistance to agriculture, and more importantly, by the additional growth in GDP you could expect through better agricultural policy and better institutional quality, which is the last bar. So policies have been a driving force behind what we had. But greater alignment is needed going forward between macro policies and ag sector policies, but also between human development policies and ag sector policies. Next slide. So let me get a couple of conclusions here that are important. Daniel referred to some worrying signs in terms of policies that are not conducive, policies that may be more in line with mistakes of the past than the needs of the future. I refer to that for the risk as a risk of policy reversals. Policy reversals which will threaten the transformation goals because it will take us back perhaps to the policies Daniel mentioned, examples, and you'll hear that through all the presentations here. Strong love for subsidies, sometimes not targeted, whether you talk about imports or mechanical equipments and other things. The resorts to export bans, resorts to high tariffs, and more importantly, the regulatory and institutional barriers we have around agriculture. So the more we go back to those, the more we'll threaten progress. And why we have that risk and really need to be clear about it is that currently we have a new leadership in Africa. Most of the leaders today wouldn't know really what went wrong in the 60s and 70s and 80s because we don't have an institutional memory. That document illustrates that. We would like to bring that back to the fore in the ATOR and through our chapters and others. We have more open and pluralistic policy systems with very strong pressures for populistic measures and interventions. Countries have a larger fiscal space. They can do a lot of things that they want. And therefore, if they were to go back to the wrong policies of the past, can do a lot of harm before we go forward. So are we going to return to the failed policy of the past, or are we going to pursue policy renewal as it has taken place under the CAADP agenda and Agenda 2063, meaning enhanced mutual accountability, like the biennial review, Ambassador Sako talked about that, the joint sector reviews that are going on in the countries, enhancing data and expertise for evidence-based policy, and deepening the CAADP agenda. I think that is the direction for the future, renewing policies. We go to the last, next slide. We do know what defines good policies that will support policy transformation. Those are policies that are based on local relevant evidence. Those are policies that have a clear, measurable targets and milestones. They are policies that undergo rigorous reviews, technical, social, environmental. They are policies that are adequately tracked and evaluated, and they are policies that are open to inclusive consultation and dialogue. To avoid the risk of reversal and to continue the policy renewal journey that we are on with CAADP, we will need to keep in mind always these characteristics of good policies. And my final message to you, just like my first message, good policies may not be a solution for everything, but bad policies are truly a problem for everything else. Thank you very much. I'll continue my chairmanship and move to the moderated panel. We are pleased and honored to be joined for this panel discussion, which was again to be moderated by our planned chairperson for this morning, Dr. Jimmy Adam, Executive Secretary, Permanent Interstate Committee for Drought Control in the Sahel, SILS, who, as I said earlier, for those who are joining us later, had to attend a extraordinary summit that wasn't planned. It was decided over the weekend. So I will try to fill the job. And we have as panelists here today, Honorable Sekou Sangare, Commissioner, Agriculture, Environment and Water Resources of the Economic Community of West African States. Welcome, Commissioner Sangare, to the panel and to the conference this year. He will be joined by Mr. Claude Bizimana Murakazaneza Claude, Chief Executive Officer, National Agricultural Export Development Board of Rwanda. We also have with us on the panel Mrs. Elizabeth Simadala, President, Pan-African Farmers Organization from Kenya. We are happy and pleased to have with us Dr. Atsuko Toda, Director of Agricultural Finance and Rural Development at the African Development Bank in Cote d'Ivoire. And last but not least, my friend and brother, Dr. Simon Ewi, Regional Director, Sustainable Development, West and Central Africa, World Bank, Washington, DC. I hope you're all around and your mics are opened. So I would like to welcome you all to the conference again. And if Dr. Sangare is around, I would like to start with the first question to her. I'm sorry, to him. What's happening now with my, okay. Go and get it back. Okay, so Honorable Sekou Sangare, in your job as ECOWAS, we have in ECOWAS a critical body for facilitating coherence and cooperation across West African states. My question to you is, what do you see as the top priority requiring improved cross-national cooperations to bolster agricultural transformation in the region? What will be the top priority requiring improved cross-national cooperation to bolster agricultural transformation in the region related to your policy agenda?
Dear Chairman, unfortunately, Commissioner Sangare has not joined yet.
Okay, very good. Then we'll move to the next panelist. Do you know whether Claude has joined? Because we know he was going to be on the road.
I would ask speakers that are
Claude, are you online?
To open their microphone and their cameras, please.
Okay, if you have the list, you should be able to see whether Claude has joined us. If Claude hasn't joined, then I'll move to Ms. Elizabeth Simadala, the President of the Pan-African Farmers Organization. Ms. Simadala, you work with many different farmers organizations across the continent that presumably have different priorities for investment and support from their governments. How does the Pan-African Farmers Organization help farmers come together to prioritize desired responses and communicate those to the relevant policymakers? How do they engage? Is your mic open, Ms. Simadala?
Yes, I hope you can hear me.
Yeah, we hear you well, ma'am. Please go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Chair. My network is not very okay, so I would like
please go ahead. You're okay now. We
mute
can
my
hear you.
video so that it.
Okay, please go ahead.
Okay. So thank you to AKADEMIYA2063 for inviting PAFO to be part of RISAC's 2020 conference. Distinguished excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, good morning, afternoon, and good evening. So back to your question, from our experience, coming together into business clusters or cooperatives and farmers association is the most effective way to attract the attention of the different actors in the agriculture value chain. And as farmers of Africa, we believe in the power of numbers. We all know that PAFO is the biggest achievement for Africa and of course to African Union, having facilitated the process of its formation. And we know that Africa is the only continent globally with a continental farmers organization, currently drawing our membership from 49 countries and more than 70 national our membership from 49 countries and more than 70 national farmers organizations and representing voices of over 80 million family farmers. So how do we hope our farmers to come together to prioritize the desired responses and be able to communicate them? From the Pan-Africa Farmers Organization perspective, this starts with our strategic alignment. Our strategy is through a member consultative process, and it responds to the member needs at all levels, right from the national level to the continental level. And when you look at our current focus, it's on economic services. And our strategy calls for institutional strengthening of ourselves as a continental institution, but also for our membership to support the members at different levels. And we can proudly say that farmers' organizations are currently operating as professional institutions. Additionally, our policy focus has also shifted from the general policy to value chain related in order to prepare our farmers to be able to tap into the One Africa market, the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. We have adopted a number of tools that we use to understand the capacity gaps of our membership, like the organizational capacity assessment tool. And we come in to build the capacity gaps that are identified. We also use tools like the Farmers Advocacy Consultative Tool. This has been championed by AgriTailor, and this allows farmers to prioritize their policy issues and relevant policymakers for attention. We also do this through continuous surveys and studies with our membership and come up with continental position on priority issues. The just concluded one for this case is the recent study on the impact of COVID on African farmers. And as PAFO, we have a position on the same, which we recently launched on the World Food Day. We've been conducting continental briefings, of course, with support from our partners, where we are able to identify different topical areas in different aspects of the agriculture sector. For example, in trade, on land issues, climate change, gender, among others. And we discuss this and we narrow the continental perspective to the national level, since this is where the implementation takes place. But additionally, we also conduct capitalization and knowledge management workshops where we all come together and share experience of how different regional farmers organizations approach policy at their level. So this peer-to-peer learning also allows us to understand the different aspects of policy making processes in different regions. And again, through our regional farmers organizations, we've been able to conduct comparative budget analysis, where we compare budgets of different countries, for example, under the Eastern Africa Farmers Federation. It has been doing the budget analysis for the different East Africa community member states. And we use this evidence to empower our national farmers organizations to lobby for this evidence is used to lobby for increased budget allocation, but also for special programs that may not be included in the mainstream agriculture budget. And lastly, we also conduct annual presidential diplomacy visits to our membership to be able to understand them better in terms of their priorities, in terms of progress with the implementation of a number of projects, and their challenges. But we also use this opportunity together to knock on the doors of different development partners, the different ministries, the different agencies, and to be able to unlock the opportunities for farmers. And we use this opportunity also policy issues that require their actions with some policies at different levels. One or two examples.
You're bringing up Ms. Simadala. Maybe I should come back to you in a minute. Perhaps the line is going to be more stable. Let me choose the opportunity of you. Are you back? Okay. So let me choose the opportunity.
Yes.
Okay, let me choose the opportunity of you talking about Ms. Simadala.
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah, can I move on to Dr. Atsuko Toda, because I want her to respond to some of the issues that you raised. You talked about you as part for conducting, for example, in one area, public investment and public expenditures to look at how different countries are investing in support of agriculture. And we have here Dr. Atsuko Toda from the African Development Bank, which under its strategy, Feed Africa, strategy for agricultural transformation in Africa, the African Development Bank estimated that about 315 to 400 billion is required between 2015 and 2025 to transform a selection of 18 value chains across the continent. So going back to public expenditure and investment. So this is a large amount of money, of course. So my question to Dr. Toda is, how is the African Development Bank using its financial leverage to raise the required investments from the different parties that should come together to do that? Dr. Toda.
Thank you very much, Usman. And I'd like to thank the colleagues in AKADEMIYA2063 and of course IFPRI for this excellent opportunity. With regards to the large number of resources that's required, the African Development Bank, together with other development partners and partners like yourselves, really looks to do more around supporting governments to deploy public resources in a way that unleashes private and commercial investment to achieve the CAADP goals. So it's not just public sector, but it's very much around leveraging, de-risking, and unleashing private and commercial investment. Given that many African countries are facing indebtedness and fiscal deficit issues, the how-to is absolutely critical. In Daniela's presentation, we saw the multiple areas where it's so critical to prioritize. We now need to look at working with government, building on what is working, accelerating, and providing implementation approaches with the private sector. Some key organizing principles for bank investments include using a value chain approach, which is not new, but it is new in terms of identifying investments in the interface between productivity, marketable surplus, value addition, and market infrastructure. Another area where the African Development Bank puts a lot of emphasis is promoting access to high quality seeds and fertilizers, particularly for food crops. Investing in backbone infrastructure. This is identifying and building on brownfield capital investments, as well as those market infrastructures that already have a dynamic of its own. moving towards platforms that coordinate value chain stakeholders, engaging both large and smaller enterprises, and then developing more efficient approaches for implementation and operations. The weak coordination and institutional capacity limitations, the fragmented supply chains, and the insufficient investment of agro-allied industries are some of the major challenges. But we believe that the selective investment in competitive subsectors, the right policies, as you have mentioned, Usman, and the renewal of those policies, hard and soft infrastructure are areas precisely where we see future opportunities.
Very good. Thank you very much. Excellent. Let me again then go to Dr. Ewi. As a World Bank Regional Director for Sustainable Development for Africa, this investment we're talking about and resources requires alignment, synergy, convergence between different parties, different strategic frameworks and policies, so that you can create the kind of complementarity that is needed for great effectiveness. So in your role at the World Bank, you're responsible for ensuring that regional and country operations are informed by global strategies, given the diverse country, regional, and global strategies. How much do you think such strategies are aligned and harmonized to help deliver on both the CAADP and Malabo goals, as well as the Sustainable Development Goals? How do you see the space being synergistic to facilitate your work as the World Bank, but also other partners who are trying to move these different agendas, CAADP, Malabo, and the SDGs? Okay.
Thank you, Usman, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone else. Let me start by thanking you and all everyone from academia for inviting me to this important conversation. I take this opportunity to also really greet my friends around the table. I would like to first also not only thank you, Usman, personally, as a very good friend and leader in this field. Let me also thank Madam Sako for honoring her presence to this agenda, demonstrating actually the importance of African Union ownership on this agenda. I see also DG Yuan of IFPRI present. This is really fantastic. And also happy to see Atsuko on this panel. I have not seen her for a long time. Let me also thank everyone else who's participating in this conversation. I want to state that before even coming to your question, Usman, we are in a period of unprecedented circumstances. The issue of the food insecurity in Africa has been aggravated by the COVID-19. Even before we discussed the issue of the impact of COVID, already the continent was already running into an alarming situation with like some 256 million people going hungry. I want to, in this instance, really begin by also saying I listened to part of your presentation, Usman, in terms of the growth in value added in agriculture over the past several years. Yet, a lot of challenges remain because of the increased, the lower productivity per worker, and also the poverty, and the implication and the role of policies, bad policies. As you said, bad policies, when they are difficult to remove. Good policies are not enough, but poor policies can make things worse, and we need to get out of it. In Africa this year, the food insecurity situation has been aggravated also by the locust in East Africa. We have seen it. Some issues that have never happened in the past 25 years. All this combined really have aggravated the food insecurity situation on the continent. It's a double crisis, we can call it. Now, coming to your specific question on how the the different strategies can be aligned and harmonized to deliver, the CAADP Malabo goals. I want to let you and other panelists and also friends in the room. I want to tell you a little bit about how the World Bank itself works, so that you can see, how things are aligned. First of all, we collectively work on what we call the systematic country diagnostic. Okay, in abbreviation, it's called SCD. They are prepared in consultation with national authorities and other stakeholders. So the SCDs basically is a diagnostic exercise that identifies challenges and opportunities for a country to accelerate progress toward development goals. Okay, and then after the SCDs, the systematic country diagnostic will develop what we call the country partnership framework, to have what we call a country model program, which is evidence-based, in which the different programs of the World Bank in particular countries are designed. It's in this process that the CAADP priorities, are also brought in, basically. So the CAADP priorities are embedded in the country partnership framework. Okay, that is actually the document dictating, if you want, the resources going forward. Now, during a particular fiscal year, things can change in the sense that priorities can change depending on circumstances. You have flood or you have locusts, and then there could be some, shift in resources. But by and large, what we do is to influence, the agenda of the country partnership framework by bringing in, outcome of dialogue with countries based on the national investment plan. So let me give you some example. Because of the impact of climate, we are working with countries where we are now working on what we call the climate smart agriculture investment plan that are actually used to update the national agriculture investment plans. So we have done, for example, several countries. Zambia, we have done that, where in Zambia, for example, the climate smart agriculture investment plan recommend focusing on crop diversification, commercial horticulture, agroforestry and infrastructure. For example, in Lesotho also, the climate smart agriculture investment plan has informed the design of a 50 million second phase of a project. Okay, so along the way, we work with countries to actually work on the CAADP plan, the CAADP National Agricultural Investment Plan. We modify them with the analysis that we're doing with them. Along the way, we work with our partners. And this particular year is a good example, where we work with the African Union, the FAO, for example, in the context of COVID. We have had intensive consultation, starting with an April 16 African Union FAO convened ministerial discussion on the impact of COVID on food security. This was followed by another consultation on July 27, including Minister of Agriculture, Trade, and Finance, to try to get their, if you want, pledging and support for a program. And what we use this information, basically bringing in the conversation we have at the country level. I'm pleased to tell you that at this moment, and we are working actually on a major report for the African Union, where we are highlighting basically how much the World Bank has invested and scaled up in agriculture and food security in Africa, modified by the conversation that we have had along the way.
Excellent.
And yeah, today, I'm also telling you that to ensure the coordination with the CAADP agenda, the World Bank is chairing the Development Partners Coordination Group of CAADP. okay? And in this process, for example, what we do is to ensure that there's alignment. End of this month, I think there's plan for some ministerial, and we're discussing that actually, and which is going on quite fine. So it involves several level of conversation at different levels. It's not as easy as we might think, but at least we get some result. Excellent. I can tell you, as I'm talking today, it may not, I cannot claim all credit for that, but I can tell you that the World Bank, in its entirety, is talking about a multi-phase approach on a food security agenda. Some 25, I won't, let me not give the figure, but a multi-phase, approach to be able to focus on food security. And we'll be working on that. And these are things that the executive directors, the leadership of the bank is working on. It means that we're just like we have had, for example, a whole agenda on low-cost, a multi-phase approach, which is many years of support, many years, and horizontal, many countries and many years. We are going to have a whole agenda on food security. But I can tell you that all this is brought about by all the conversation that we're having, the discussion, how the CADEP process is being brought in. All this combined lead to that, okay? We're not claiming all credit on that, but we can certainly be sure that we have influenced also part of the agenda. So it's a multi-pronged approach where you have different contributions, different outcome, different conversations that are coming together to influence an agenda. So let me stop here at this moment. And
excellent.
We are really working hard, to ensure that the CADEP agenda is mainstream in our work program. Thank you.
Excellent, Simon. Thank you very much for that very comprehensive presentation on what the bank is doing right now in aligning and supporting alignment and scaling up. You also addressed COVID and what you're doing. I would like to give the opportunity for Dr. Toda and Mrs. Madala also to say, perhaps briefly, how they're approaching COVID. In the case of Dr. Toda, how the bank is working to ensure that agriculture remains an important priority for investment, especially in responding and building after COVID. So briefly, if you may.
Thank you so much, Usman. And again, it's so nice to come after my friend Simeon, and really exciting to hear what's happening on the World Bank side with regards to the food security agenda. With regards to COVID, of course, health infrastructure was the priority, and there was rapid support to governments. But thinking beyond the short term and going to the longer term, the idea is really some of the policy areas that have been mentioned with regards to supporting private sector, ensuring enabling business environment for large companies. So we all need to work together on the enabling business environment, and never as now have African governments been so open to private sector investment, number one. Number two, it was mentioned, the SME agenda. It is not just large companies, but there is a whole set of medium-sized enterprises in the midstream that have proven solutions that we need to continue to provide policy for. And I think the African Union is absolutely critical in its advocacy for that. Usman, your group has been talking about intra-African trade, and this is a huge potential. And the report, the African Agricultural Trade Monitor 2020, is a seminal report with regards to agro-processing and feeding the cities. The African market is going to be one of the largest consumption markets for food in the world. So I think we really need to focus on that. I think that it is incredibly important, as we have government decision makers and policy makers around this table, that we keep our eyes on implementation. Policy implementation needs to be simple. We are not asking African governments to do complicated things. We need to keep it simple for governments to be able to implement these measures. We already know that institutional weaknesses can absolutely crush policy. So I think things like the alignment of exchange rates to be competitive and providing the right incentives for local processing is very critical. I know that there's a debate around devaluations of currencies, but devaluations in some instances can be extremely useful. And finally, the big question on digital. Africa can leapfrog with digital because the capital investments required when it comes to digital business opportunities are much less. So can we actually help our youth, the populations in the cities, really take advantage of the fourth industrial revolution called the digital revolution? So I think these are some of the policies where Africa has a massive opportunity. I'm so happy that we're talking to the right people today to give it an evidence-based, lesson-based, history-based platform to converse. And I think that working with the development partners, advocating through the African Union, we have a huge opportunity with regards to acceleration. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Dr. Toda. Let me then close with Mrs. Smadala to briefly tell us how the farmers' organizations are planning to rebuild, to revitalize their roles in the post-COVID environment. Ms. Madala, if you're with us still. Are you muted or is the line bad?
Thanks again. Thanks again, Usman and my colleague panelists. Learning from the COVID experience and the disruption that has happened with this pandemic, as farmers organizations, we need to be supported in innovation and digital education to be able to continue supporting our membership with the limited disruption. We need to take the advantage of the over 80% mobile phone penetration in most of countries in Africa, so as to be able to do agribusiness. There's need for government and non-government organizations and development partners to support digital literacy, but also to put in place an infrastructure that allows the correction, the processing, the utilization of data to be able to make informed policies, informed decisions, and informed investments. I can assure you the future of agriculture transformation in Africa lies in data. I'm happy to hear from Simeon from the World Bank on what the World Bank is doing towards food security. And of course, our appreciation to the World Bank for supporting some of the farmer-led initiatives in Africa, like the e-granary under the Global Agriculture Food Security Program. So as farmers organizations, we long to see an enabling agribusiness environment that is coupled with relevant investments. We've seen scenarios where different taxes, for example, have been introduced to the already burdened population. When we talk of, for example, the fuel taxes, the OTT tax, the mobile money tax, among others, this is an additional tax to the farmers who live in villages and use mobile money, since commercial banks are located in urban centers. So in summary, there is a need for right investments across the entire value chain. And we need to take consideration of the farm to fork model for effective resource allocation to be able to have access to inputs to services like financing, insurance, irrigation, transport, post-harvest management, among others, without forgetting markets. Thank you, and over to you, Usman.
Thank you very much, Ms. Madala. I would like to, Elizabeth, I would like to open now for discussion. I think when you get the floor, first raise your hand so we can see who is asking for the floor. And when you do, please open your mic, introduce yourself, be brief with your questions, and when you're done, please close your mic again. And you're welcome to raise, to ask questions on the presentations as well as the panel. So the floor is open. I couldn't see all hands raised, or maybe I could. I'm looking at the list. Yes, I can. So let me start with my friend, Mafa Chipeta. What a pleasure to see you. So please, the floor is yours for your questions. You just muted your mic. Now you're open. Please go ahead, sir.
It's on now. If you can hear me.
Yes, we can, sir.
Thank you for the opportunity. I really benefited from all the interventions I was here in time to listen to. I just wanted to make 2 or 3 points. The topic refers to the role of public policies. Some of the presenters actually focused on their programs rather than on the policies, but that doesn't really maybe matter that much. My first observation is that on the Africa scene, we probably should be thinking about strategies and policies at the national level being listened to more than the many global policy and strategy frameworks that influence what gets done in the countries. Look at a small country like my home country, Malawi. It has a national development plan and agricultural and food security policy. By the time it tries to make that compatible with AKADEMIYA, with the SDGs, with the World Bank preferences, African Development Bank preferences, African Union policies, it is lost. We need to enable the countries to listen to themselves more and to respect what their policies and strategies are a lot more. Otherwise, we keep shifting. And I think it is unfortunate for a weak, institutionally weak continent to be put in that position.
Excellent.
Second,
sorry, okay, go ahead.
You can hear me still?
Yes, yes, sure. Please go ahead.
The second point I wanted to make was that we probably should be selective about what policies we want to prioritize. To go for the whole full range of policies for the value chain from farm to fork, I think as the one colleague mentioned. Or at the same time, when you got weak financial and institutional capacity, I think makes it difficult for Africa to make more rapid progress. It needs to select where we really need to focus on. Now, since about 1980, in Africa, we moved from net surplus to net deficit on agriculture. So it's very difficult to talk about food in many cases because there is not enough food. So the question of producing more and achieving surpluses gives us not only the capacity to make money from agriculture, but also to ensure food security at all times without having to beg.
I think that's a good point maybe to stop it there, because I mean you made two main really important point, if I just may, to give space and time for others also to.
Okay, so let us focus on what can raise productivity and production first.
Absolutely. Okay. Absolutely. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Zikombe, I would say. All right. So yes, I think your first point, actually, the focus and alignment is so important. And that is, I think, actually the heart and the soul of the Comprehensive Africa Agriculture Development Program. As you know, full well, it's not a program and more a framework to help countries like Malawi to align with principles, best practices, and specific targets that they will commit to, just like what you said, raising productivity, for example. And I think there's been quite, to be fair, a good alignment by the global community around AKADEMIYA. Simon talked a lot about it. FDB is leading there, so which is quite good. Policy prioritization, of course, is quite important. But let me go to Jan Low, and I also would like, Jan, if you can be brief so that the others can come in as well. So go ahead, Jan. And if you have questions to panelists or representative, just please say that directly.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Badiani. I am interested in seeing that from the presentations that were made, there's still this major constraint in getting adequate investment in the agricultural sector, in spite of all the positive evidence in the CAADP process. So is there any good evidence that shows the association between the strength and the voice of farmers and the level of investment in the agricultural sector by different governments?
I think there is a reference to that in the second chapter of the report. And of course, we're just at the beginning of this conference. I think between today and Thursday, you will probably get more information on that. But there's a reference to that in the second chapter. We do have numbers that show that in absolute levels, African countries have nearly doubled their outlays going to agriculture from the 90s to the 2000s. We did have, however, noticed over the last couple of years that that absolute level was stagnating or bending south a little bit. So thank you for raising the issue of investment in agriculture and expenditure by the countries. A major effort we have to keep our eyes on, and I think this report will bring it out through our deliberations in the next couple of days. Let me go to Ms. Isolina Boto. You're muted, Isolina.
Oh, yes. Yes, thank you very much, Chair, and congratulations for an excellent workshop, but also excellent presentations. Mine is more an input because I'm looking forward, the discussions of coming as well in the panels, but following on the previous speaker on investment in agriculture, and where I salute very much the organization of the farmers at continental level, I would like to stress more the input into the policies, and especially even more at continental level with the African Free Trade Agreement, of the private sector as such as well. And not only on the agribusiness, but on the major economic partner, which would be the SMEs. And I think sometimes there is perhaps not enough inclusion of those voices into the policies, or policies which are not enough oriented towards the support of this missing middle, which will be the one that really will make the agriculture transformation in Africa. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Isolina. I think that's perhaps a question that Daniel may want to comment on a little bit, the political economy of including the middle segment actors in the processing sector in policy formulation. Would you like to comment on that, Daniel?
Yes, thanks, Usman. Well, yes, I mean, I think that's critical, is about how we're talking a lot about improving opportunities in the enabling environment for this constituency, but their political power and voice varies immensely across the region. And so we'll talk a little bit about this on Thursday when we look at the political economy chapter. But it really comes down to the types of state business relations that we have in a particular country. Are they collusive? Are they predatory? Or do they foster growth coalitions, which is, of course, the type of relationship that we ideally want? And of course, governments have had different histories. Some have embraced the private sector, some have distrusted the private sector, and particularly private traders in the past. So we'll talk a little bit about more of different kind of typologies and how they apply to different countries on this issue on Thursday. But this key point about targeting and nuance, and keeping in mind the variation in the type of enterprises that we're talking about and their history of relationships with the government, as well as where there are kind of business forums that allow for more engagement with the private sector is quite key.
Excellent, thank you, Daniel. I think Yanlo referred to investment as well. And Elizabeth, you're saying that you do some of these comparative studies across countries to look at public investment in agriculture and so on. Is there a story emerging from those studies that you would like to mention here in response to the questions by Dr. Yanlo? By the way, a recipient of the World Food Prize a couple of years ago, so needs to be recognized here. Elizabeth? Are you muted, Elizabeth? Are you with us?
Usman, if you can repeat for me, I think I had lost connection.
Oh, okay.
I had lost connection, so I didn't pick your question.
Okay. Dr. Yanlo was asking about the need to increase investment in agriculture and where we are on that. Are we keeping the pace? Are we investing, putting basically our money where our mouth is? And I wanted to refer to the studies that your group carried out looking at public investment across countries. And I was wondering whether there was anything transpiring from those studies that you would like to share in terms of your view, your understanding of how public investment in agriculture is proceeding.
Yes,
have I lost you again?
I think can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you now. Please go ahead.
Hello?
Yeah, we hear you. Please go ahead.
What I can say is that as we speak, the current investments are not enough. And from what we've gathered from our experience on working with farmers and farmers organizations, is that there is little investment in terms of data, and it is a very big tool in terms of evidence for decision making, for the right investments, and so on. So when it comes to the investments, again, we need to look at the value chain in a holistic approach, where the investment should cut across the entire value chain, right from the production to the end of the value chain. For example, when it comes to investments in inputs, are farmers able to get the right seeds? Are they able to get the right fertilizer? When it comes to services, are they able to get, for example, right and access to irrigation, to post-harvest management, to mechanization, to insurance, to financing, and so on. But also when it comes to the market, are they able to link to sustainable markets? Are they able to do agro-processing? Are they able to have structured markets? I think from our side as farmers and as farmers organizations, our advocacy is more into a holistic approach towards investments in value chain development. Thank you, and over to you.
Very good, excellent. Thank you very much. We have our panelists, other two panelists who heard the discussion about policy priorities, about investment, and as Isolina Boto was talking, forgot what the point was again. So at least the investment part, Dr. Toda or Ewi, do you have any comments on what your observations are in terms of increasing investment in agriculture across the value chain, as Elizabeth just said, from your work and your engagement in the countries? Let me start with Dr. Toda first, and I come to you, Simone.
Usman, I think she said she had to leave.
Oh, okay, that's true. Then let me go to Simone then. Simone, sure. Would you like to comment on that?
Yes, thank you, Usman. And I would also like to relate to the question earlier by Marfa. It's about almost, I mean, it's in line with the question that you have just posed. I want to say from the World Bank viewpoint, in addition to investment, we do what we call analytical work in countries that really identify the policy constraints, and some of those policy constraints are also taken on board through budget support, okay? And then in the context of budget support, the countries themselves indicate where they want to do their reforms, and then resources are given. So for example, I mean, there are so many of them, but I want to give you just a few examples that are ongoing. So in Angola, for example, we are doing some analytical work to align realign ag support policies and program. Okay, that's will be delivered this year. In Burundi, we're doing the same thing, which will serve you to plan the food security operation in the country. In West Africa, for example, in the context of a large food security program we're doing some analytical work on together with CORAF and sales on food system resilience to look at, what are how can we strengthen, the sustainability of food systems, and what are the enabling policies and so on. But specifically, what I would like to talk about is the prioritizing of public spending, because that is what is key. The African Union CAADEP publish every year, a scoring exercise indicating where countries stand. Today, from 2017 and now, all the most of the countries are reversing, in terms of their investment. So we are suggesting that the countries should actually try to look at how their public expenditure is actually organized, so they can reprioritize public spending. So Usman, you mentioned in your graph where you have the zero line and you look at the below the line, the taxation, and also above the line, the subsidy, and you saw that converging. There are countries where actually the public expenditure is not actually focusing on the public goods, but it's actually wasted in some kind of subsidies that are not targeted specifically, okay, to the people who need it. This is not about not focusing on subsidies, it's about targeting the subsidies to the people who could actually use it effectively, which will require a lot of reforms in countries. And we are trying to do that through, a promotion of electronic voucher systems that can make sure that the private sector is fully involved, that can make sure that the beneficiaries are those really who need to receive, the subsidies. So for us at the World Bank, we want to be able to encourage the acceleration and use of already committed resources, to reprioritize them to the public good that's needed, and then the additional resources that are coming in from donors fund and other development partners can actually focus on reinforcing what's already being done by the countries. So, so again, to repeat myself, it's quite important to look at the prioritization of the public, expenditure. How much countries are putting into agriculture? Where are they spending the money? What is the efficiency of these expenditures? These are the kind of reform that we need to be able, to do. I will not end by, saying that we are in an unparalleled, situation in Africa that requires what I would call an unparalleled response, and we need all collectively to rise to the challenge. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me take one last intervention. I see Mafa Chipeta's hand up. So if you can take 1 minute and a half, max, Dr. Chipeta, floor is yours. You're muted, I think. Mafa, you're muted. Okay, please go ahead.
Okay. I have just one comment on this question of public money and so on. Farming is not done by countries. It is not done by governments. It's done by farmers, whether as individuals or by families. I really think we should be focusing a lot more when we provide money, international or local, on making the farming profitable, both by interventions on the market and on inputs. If we make the farmer profitable, he is going to invest or she is going to invest. If we keep going to the bureaucracies to make those decisions, I don't think we're going to make progress. In Europe, they've got subsidies. In America, they've got subsidies. They first subsidize the farmer. They don't subsidize the state government or the county government or whatever. They subsidize the farmer. And the farmer works out a budget, knows what to grow that will give him or her a profit to reinvest. I don't think we should make an exception of Africa and keep targeting money at bureaucracies. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I guess, don't think that's what Simeon or the others were referring to. In opposite, actually, they're referring to improving the efficiency of those subsidies and how budgets in general are being spent by government. So I think that there you're probably talking about the same thing. Government can be subsidized within government functions, but farmers will be the focus on government functions. I see Suadu, please. So that'll be the last question I will take. Go ahead, and then we'll give the floor to the panelists if they desire to react to that. Please.
Okay.
So.
Thank you, Dr. Badian. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you very well.
Okay, Suadu Sakho Jimbira, working with IFAT. So my question is that we are talking about increasing like expenditure, public expenditure and public investment in the agricultural sector. But I'm wondering if we could, like this investment could help make this investment more efficient without investing in more accurate agricultural data. It seems that investing in agricultural data is not among like the top priority for our governments. So how can we help our government thinking more in investing in agricultural data while increasing this investment in the ag sector? Thank you very much.
Excellent idea. And of course, this is all the focus of RESAC's, but also of the broader AKADEMIYA2063 work program. Increasing data and improving the quality of data is critical here. And I think you'll hear a little bit about it here during the course of this conference. There are 3 sessions where you probably will hear that on the mutual accountability work in general, but also on the support to the process of the biennial review and the joint sector reviews and the like. And finally, also when we present the M&E report of CADEP. So I hope you'll be around to join us for those different sessions. So unless there's a very burning need from the panelists to take the floor, we are now at the time we would like to take a very short break before we come back. So it's going to be rather short, of about 5 to 10 minutes. So we come back here at 9:10. So it's just basically the time to stretch our legs a little bit. So join me to thank our panelists and the presenters, but also to thank those who are in the opening session for the welcoming remarks. Ambassador Sako and Deputy Administrator Barry Morin and DG of ISPRI Johan Swinen, and Daniel for giving us an overview of the report. Thank you very much, and we'll connect or you will stay online. In 5 minutes, we'll continue our program. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, it looks like my mic was muted when I was speaking. All right, so let me welcome everybody back to the session, the second plenary session on enabling environment for transforming agri-food systems. We got two presentations, one on mutual accountability and African agricultural transformation by Dr. John Nwego, Senior Research Fellow at IFPRI and coordinator of the RESAC's programs for Academia 2063. Then we got a second presentation by Professor Njuguna Ndungu, Executive Director, African Economic Research Consortium, on aligning macroeconomic policies for agricultural transformation in Africa. Presentation will be made by his co-author, Dr. Abebe Shimele. So it is a pleasure for me now to welcome Dr. John Nwego. And after his presentation and that of Abebe Shimeles, we'll have two lead discussants on the two presentation or introduction when we get to that. So I'd like now to call on John to make his presentation for 10 minutes. John?
Thank you, Usman, and thank you for having me. My presentation, as Usman said, is on mutual accountability in agricultural transformation in Africa, a study that we did with three of my colleagues, Greenwell from RESAC's Southern Africa, Titi from AKADEMIYA2063, and Jim from USAID. Next slide, please. So the reason or the rationale is that first, mutual accountability development issues are multi-stakeholder phenomenon that require more than just one organization, one entity. Therefore, you need a framework to bring all of them together to deliver on a common agenda. And the third reason is that mutual accountability is really one of the foundations of the NEPAD since its adoption, and CADEP Malabo agenda as well since 2003. Next slide. So in the study, we try to look at what are the drivers of successful mutual accountability from many experiences, and we found four many drivers. The first is institutions or countries or whoever they are need a common vision, development vision, that it's not only a sum of individual visions, but it's a joint vision to deliver on something. The second driver or pillar, it is the need for voluntary and transparent commitment to invest or undertake some actions in support of that common vision. And the third, we need to put together a system of accountability to make sure that everyone is playing by the rule to deliver on that common vision, which then leads to the joint accountability system, so that everyone is delivering on commitment. Now, that's so in addition to that more or less theoretical set of pillars of drivers, when we look at the CADEP agenda itself, we notice that the countries that are more successful in implementing the mutual accountability framework are countries where the ownership and leadership is very, very strong. Second, there is a need for inclusive participation. Yes, it is an agriculture-driven development strategy, but require contribution, participation from different other stakeholders. Then for that mutual accountability to be successful, you need the participation from all stakeholders. And of course, the last one is the importance of evidence-based policy-making, decision-making culture to build into that mutual accountability framework for it to be successful and sustainable in the long run. The question then becomes, what is the pathway from mutual accountability to expected outcomes? Here, because mutual accountability forces monitoring, evidence-based monitoring and evaluation, it leads to improve policies. It leads to reforms, and this is done in a continuously in a way that when reform policies are improved, are based on evidence, it leads to better policy outcomes in terms of financing, investment, access to technology, to input, more efficient value chain, and of course, overall capacity for not only analytical capacity, but also implementation capacity. And all of that put together is expected to improve development outcomes in terms of productivity, growth, better trade, poverty reduction, hunger reduction, and better food and nutrition. And of course, to build the resilience of the whole food system. So that's what the promise of a good and successful mutual accountability framework. For the sake of time, we here decided to focus on the two set of those mutual accountability. The first one is the joint sector review at regional and country level, and the second will be on the biannual review. So the joint sector review is really it's built around the National Agriculture Investment Plan as a way of implementing CAADP Malabo agenda. And those National Agriculture Investment Plan at country level, they define the vision. You remember I mentioned that having common vision is really one of the pillars of successful mutual accountability framework. And at country level, again, it is a agriculture development, development-driven vision, which require contribution from actors beyond the agricultural sector. So it's very important that in that joint sector review process, we include, and that's what we observe, actors from Ministry of Finance, from Ministry of Infrastructure, of Land Affairs, the private sector, civil society. It has to be an inclusive process. The biannual review, it is more or less the same as joint sector review, but with a higher, some of the higher goals, broad set of goals, multi-sectoral goals in terms of overall agriculture and food system, like nutritional outcomes, trade, and employment, youth employment, and so forth. And it's required some comparability because it is at the continental level, regional, and of course country level as well. And the process of mutual accountability really contribute to overarching principle of mutual accountability that is embedded into the CAADEP process, in addition to the joint sector review, midterm review, and of course, other NAIP assessment. So the biennial review kind of includes all these other processes from top to the bottom. The question often is how successful or effective is the biennial process with respect to progress in achieving the Malabo, CAADEP Malabo goals. So far, the continent has had two processes, BR processes, and learning from those processes highlights some of the benefit that countries are harvesting. Here, we just listed a few of them because as a result of the BR process, a country like Malawi was able to improve data and policy around the agriculture sector. Lesotho pledged to increase budget allocation for agriculture. Mozambique, that's where it all started, recommit to allocating 10% of budget to agriculture and institute policy changes. Côte d'Ivoire moved to programmatic changes to increase agricultural productivity. Niger promote private agriculture investment. Togo makes policy and data improvement. As a result of the biennial review processes, countries are willing to revise the policies and to improve improve policies to faster the achievement of CAADEP and Malabo commitment.
John, you take one more minute, please.
Yes. So with respect to ag transformation, we noticed that countries involved in mutual accountability framework tend to increase the spending in agriculture and ultimately increase productivity, both labor and land productivity. Next slide, please. And with increase in productivity, we expect labor exit from agriculture to other sectors, which will trigger overall structural transformation in Africa. So let me finish by, again, the study that we did shows that mutual accountability is key to ag transformation because countries that are successful in implementing mutual accountability, they tend to increase ag spending, which increase labor and then productivity. But however, there is a need for countries to keep the commitment to implement and support mutual accountability processes across the continent. The last slide. And amidst COVID-19, if anything we learned from COVID-19 is that we need robust mutual accountability processes to handle these type of shocks. And this, again, it adds to the call to continue to strengthen mutual accountability processes across the continent as part of the overall CAADEP Malabo agenda. I will stop here and thank you very much.
Thank you, John. Thank you. I think that mutual accountability in general, especially joint sector reviews and the biennial review, have been major innovations under the CAADEP agenda, as I said earlier. And this is really, really key for a sector where you have a multitude, huge numbers of actors who every day get up and pursuing their own individual farm or enterprise-centered goals and objectives. getting them coordinated so that they converge towards the socially optimal goal is a huge, huge challenge for a sector like agriculture. Mutual accountability makes it possible to refine thinking, to look at choices, to get consensus about the priorities and what have you, so that you can have some commonality of purpose and action. So thank you for that. Besides that broader policy shaping environment, agriculture is, of course, a big part of the global, of the country's national economy. And the broader macroeconomic environment in a given country have a huge bearing on the performance of agriculture, as we have seen in the past. So as we contemplate the future of agricultural transformation in Africa, so the role of macroeconomic policies is pretty important. So we're happy to have Abebe Shimeles from the African Economic Research Consortium presenting his paper jointly with Professor Njuguna Ndungu. So welcome, sir, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Usman. It's great to be here. Great and happy to be here. Actually, Usman, you have said it all in your earlier presentation, more or less about the patterns of macroeconomic policies in Africa as they relate to agricultural development. So what I'm going to speak about today basically reinforces exactly what you have said, maybe a little emphasizing on a few key issues, but mainly I think the message of this emphasis will be really to plead with finance ministers and central bank governors to work with ministers of agriculture in terms of designing and developing their macroeconomic policies. So the slides, I'm sure, are coming. I'm not seeing them. Yeah, okay. This was meant to be a little bit of advertisement of ARC, but I believe your audience knows what ARC is. It's the African Economic Research Consortium, probably the longest and one of the largest economic research network in Africa. Just happy to say that over 4,000 Africans have gone through the ARC, and in my career over 30 years, I haven't met anybody who was working in Africa who was not touched the revolving door of ARC. So next slide. So ARC is happy to be invited to contribute to this conversation. So basically, I think the message I have, we have in this paper and report is that even though, as Usman mentioned, there has been significant progress in terms of general macroeconomic stability in Africa, and also the efforts in general to align them with agriculture, still there is a huge road, a huge gap. Actually, we documented that there have been widespread distortions, particularly when it comes to the agricultural sector at the level of macroeconomic policy, both the monetary policy, exchange rate policies, fiscal policies, but also, you know, their attendant extensions that go into financial sector development and a whole host of complementary policies do not seem really to forge agricultural transformation. As a result, especially smallholder farms in Africa have not been able to appropriate the returns for their investment that have been generally provided through the agricultural extensions and other technological support they have received. Therefore, we really want to emphasize that the pro-agricultural macroeconomic policy is important for Africa. Next slide. I think the best place to start, you can go to the next one because outline is very clear. I just want to talk a little bit about why it is really important in Africa. We need the agricultural sector to be front and center of development. As you can see in this slide, extreme poverty and inequality, the two adverse characteristics of inclusive development seem to be quite persistent in Africa. Since almost we started documenting these numbers based on household surveys. It's evident here, Africa is the least that has progressed in terms of reducing extreme poverty over 3 decades. It's a continent where inequality is very high, despite undifferentiated and low level of economic diversification and livelihood. So it becomes very, very important for African policymaker development practitioners to take the issue of eradicating extreme poverty and also addressing inequality in their own right as developmental goals. Next slide. If we look at the underlying factors that continue to affect poverty conditions in Africa is slow progress in agriculture. In this slide, you can see that almost all of a large chunk of extreme poverty originates in the agriculture sector. If you divide the whole economy into agriculture, industry, and services, in Africa, you could see that close to 54% of poverty comes from the agriculture sector. No doubt this is because of low level of productivity growth in the sector. A comparison between China, Africa, and India, you can see that only recently Africa started to turn the curve upwards since I think the last 1990s, but it's still one of the lowest compared to China, India. But remembering that we have also a very rapidly growing population, Africa requires to accelerate productivity in the agriculture sector. Next slide, please. So one of the features also, which is worrying about agricultural progress in Africa is that even though we have seen a steady decline in the share of employment in agriculture sector, we know that it continues to employ still a significant proportion of our labor force. It is also a source of foreign exchange revenue, and also in many countries, a significant contributor to food supply. Yet, we have seen its share in GDP has declined, which basically means output per worker has not been improving as much as it should. Next slide, please. So this brings structural transformation to be really at the heart of macroeconomic policy in Africa, which essentially is having the markets to perform both in the labor markets, in the goods markets, in the output food markets, and the financial markets that can enhance the capital and labor productivity within agriculture. So this requires a very comprehensive macroeconomic policy for that purpose. Next slide. So if you look at, I mean, this is a repeat of what Usman has said, but a little bit the rate of assistance to the agriculture sector, both in relative and nominal terms, we document the same trend that almost actually, with no exception, in every, this is not even an average trend, almost in all African countries, agriculture has not benefited much from comprehensive government policy to forge its development. Next slide, please. But an interesting also observation we have been able to document is that when you look at the fiscal policy, for instance, in Africa, in this correlation, we can see that when things are not going well for the budgets, agriculture is the least to benefit, which means it is easier for finance ministers to cut budget of the agriculture sector than others, for instance. So only when there is surplus, agriculture share increases. Next slide, please. So no wonder that debt burden seems to be generally higher in countries with low productivity of agricultural productivity. In this slide, we can see a very strong and interestingly high correlation between external data, the share of GDP, and the value added per person in agriculture. So both this tell us that while agriculture is in the fringe, it is also a very important component of the entire macroeconomy. If agriculture doesn't do well, macroeconomics also suffers. Next slide. So in conclusion, I think we advocate for a revisit of macroeconomic policies in Africa in terms of advancing agricultural transformation. Many countries need to revisit a whole range of, for instance, exchange rate policies, interest rate policies, fiscal policies, including the structure of taxation, the subsidies, the allocation of public investments, and the whole factors that make up the macroeconomic tool policy set need to consider how agriculture can play its historic role in Africa's development. So in the report, we really have outlined a whole range of policies that can help this. One of, I think, our recommendation basically is that none of African countries, at least from the data we have observed, have reached the 10% share of their government budget to the what has been advocated in the various declarations, including the AKADEP, and that really requires a lot of effort. But I want also to echo the earlier panelists' suggestions that it's not just the allocation, but the efficiency of utilization of government budget also becomes important in terms of developing the infrastructure, the technology, the soft part of the like human capital, etc. So with this, perhaps I would come back in case if I'm allowed during the next year. So thanks, Usman.
Excellent. Very good. Thank you for your time. And let me now go to our two discussants and ask Dr. Samuel Benin, Deputy Division Director of the Africa Region Office at the IFPRI, to comment on the presentation on mutual accountability by John Ilumwengo. Julie, can you put the cover slide?
Yes, thank you, Usman. And also, I would like to thank AKADEMIYA2063 and the research team for inviting me to be part of this conference. Before I make my comments, I would like the conference participants to know that they are based on the chapter that was that has been written, and so it may be different from what John may have presented to you. Only because I've had a privilege to read it, and it was very good. I found it very interesting. Undoubtedly, mutual accountability has potential to help African governments and all stakeholders involved with Africa's agricultural transformation to stay the course to achieve desired results, including resilient agri-food system, food and nutrition security, and improved livelihoods. And so I really thank John and his co-authors for their chapter on mutual accountability in the 2020 ATOR, which is the Annual Trends and Outlook Report. John and his colleagues take us through the conceptual framework of mutual accountability and its best practices in the context of agricultural transformation in Africa, and particularly looking at the JSRs, or Joint Sector Review, as well as the Comprehensive Africa Agricultural Development Program Biennial Review. Then they examine the effectiveness of these two processes and platforms, that is the JSR and the BR, in their transformation using regression techniques. I think that a big thing for realizing the potential of mutual accountability in achieving desired outcomes is using the platform as well as the tracking results in prioritizing resources, which has been a lot of discussion on, and as well as in planning and implementation. It is why I find the 6 country case studies in the section of the chapter that asks if the BR is effective as a process. Very, very interesting. So here, John and his colleagues looks at the actions that have been taken in the 6 countries in response to the CAADP biennial reviews. At the policy level, the actions that have been undertaken, or at least been proposed to take, include, for example, increasing the budget allocated to agriculture in Lesotho and also Mozambique, increasing private sector investment in Cote d'Ivoire and Niger, improving access to fertilizer, seeds, and extension services in Malawi, and increasing green agriculture and improving nutrition in Togo. And so these were some of the actions that the government have put in place following the BR results. So, but the actions themselves, they are mostly in terms of the dialogues that have taken place or commitments or recommitments that have been made. Therefore, it will be good to see how they materialize over time. This is because, for example, the commitment on increasing government agriculture expenditure has been in place since 2003, when the Maputo Declaration was made. Also, the actions are only those to be undertaken by the government, such as, for example, in terms of, for example, increasing private sector development, there is the action to provide tax incentives and also to enact laws for public-private partnerships. Another one is promoting inclusive participation in the development processes and also increasing the budget to the agriculture sector. There were no actions for other stakeholders or parties in the mutual accountability process, such as private sector, farmers, civil society organizations, donors, or development partners. They may have been actions, but they were not looked at in their paper. And so this is something that I thought would have been very good if it was dealt with in the chapter. As this is also because the authors acknowledge this as a limiting feature of the Paris Declaration, in the sense that it only contained government commitments. On the estimation of the effectiveness of mutual accountability on agricultural transformation, the authors state a modest objective and estimate a simple model to infer associations or correlations between joint sector reviews and the biennial reviews, government agriculture expenditure, land and labor productivity, and the share of agriculture in total labor, which measures the agricultural transformation in general. Yet when they come to interpreting their results, they reach into the cause effect realm and use statements like they found a positive effect of government agriculture expenditure on labor and land productivity, or a statement like increase in land and labor productivity leads to a decline in the share of agriculture employment. This is inconsistent with objectives and also with, like I said, in terms of the model that they estimate. For example, in the equation on government agriculture expenditure, there were no other variables that were included except the joint sector review and the BR variables. So there were 2 variables that they used. So here, the assumption is that other factors don't matter in explaining the variation in government agriculture expenditure, or that the variables that were omitted are not correlated with the two variables that were included. So then it means that the estimate of those two variables should be okay. But we know that political economy factors, for example, are important determinants of government agriculture expenditure, and they are also correlated with the AKADEMIYA variables. Therefore, the equation on government agriculture expenditure is misspecified, and then the omitted variables in that equation, the errors will be transmitted to the other equations or the entire system of equations that they estimate. So my intuition is that they try to avoid having too many variables in the estimation, given that they have a small data set, which is made up of 52 countries and 11 time periods. And given some missing variables here and there, this gives you a maximum of about 572 observations. So if that is the case, then the thing to do is to simplify the capture of other variables by, for example, including the lag of government agriculture expenditure in that equation. So because that will carry the history and help deal with other variables that would intentionally not be included so as not to crowd the estimation. And the same can be done by including the lag of the dependent variable as an explanatory variable in the other equations. So aside from the specification and estimation issues, the interpretation of their results is also a bit inconsistent with the estimated parameters. So for example, on page 192 and 193, they state that the results also suggest a positive and significant effect of public agriculture expenditures on both labor and land productivity. But if you look at the results in the table 15.2 on page 192, you see that there is a positive coefficient of government agriculture expenditure in the labor productivity equation. But in the land productivity equation, the coefficient is negative. So they are both not positive. And so although their estimates show that both labor and land productivity is associated with agricultural transformation, that is, they are both negatively correlated with a share of agriculture in total employment, the stated overall implication that mutual accountability is associated with agricultural transformation only holds with respect to labor productivity, but not with land productivity. This is because of that, the earlier coefficient being negative, so that then some of the discussions and the conclusions are inconsistent with the actual estimation. And so just to wrap up, go back to what I said before, that mutual accountability has huge potential to help African governments and all stakeholders stay the course, by especially if the results are used in the prioritization process. So for example, the planning, the NAIPs are all linked to the platform in terms of the AKADEMIYA, so that the BR and JSLs are not used exclusively just for reporting on results without the feedback and looping back into the prioritization and planning and implementation process. This is where the advantage and also the potential will come from. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Sam. John, and for the questions, really three main issues that you could address in your discussion. Commitments and declared actions by all these countries relating to the BR, having any follow-up or the need for follow-up, so that those additional decisions that are made, that actions are taken forward. Then in the empirical part of your paper, the choice of variables and the interpretation of results. With that, I have the great pleasure to introduce Professor Celeste Monga, visiting professor of public policy at the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University. Thank you for making yourself available for joining us for this conference. Greatly appreciated. Professor Celeste Monga is going to be commenting on the presentation by Dr. Abebe Shimeles on aligning macroeconomic policies for agricultural transformation. The floor is yours, sir. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Usman Badian, for organizing this important conference. You and your team and your partners are also obviously, because I'm a macroeconomist, thank you for including macro into the conversations. Very often when high-level discussions on agriculture take place, people forget about macro, or they think that the macroeconomists and the Minister of Finance is the enemy, so they don't even invite them. So it's great to be here and to reconnect with my former accomplice, Dr. Abebe Shimiles, presenting this very interesting paper. I have a couple of preliminary conceptual quick comments, and then I will spend the last 3 minutes or so on the role of macro policy for agricultural transformation. So first, the preliminary conceptual, very quick questions and comments that I have is on what is defined or viewed as agriculture here in this paper. It's a very interesting paper, very rich, covering a lot of grounds and showing some very interesting data. But the question that one may ask first is, what is defined as agriculture, the agricultural sector? It may sound like a strange question, but with what's going on in the world with the new transformations in terms of how production is taking place, we really no longer have an agricultural sector which exists in isolation of, let's say, manufacturing. So, for instance, to me, agriculture should always be taught in conjunction with industry, agro-industry. Then the question would be, conceptually, what do we call agriculture, and whether the statistical data that we receive are really telling us the things that we need to know. The second conceptual issue is that of structural transformation and agricultural transformation. The presentation of Dr. Abebe Shimiles has sometimes mixed the two. I think that it's good to clarify that, and the fact that, I mean, I was a bit puzzled when he said that, I mean, it's also written in the paper that the contribution of agriculture in terms of GDP has declined, which is true. The question is whether we should worry about it, or when should we worry about it? Under what circumstances should we worry about it? Because to me, that's exactly, in principle, what structural transformation may look like. As economies grow and get out of the low income level into middle income and high income, well, for the past 200 years or so, the role of traditional agriculture has always diminishes. Because, of course, structural transformation means getting your resources, labor, capital, from low productivity subsistence agriculture into higher productivity sectors like manufacturing and so on, industry in general, and even services. So in principle, it's not a bad thing that the contribution of agriculture declines in terms of percentage of GDP. To me, the big thing is to look at productivity, which I think that Dr. Shimiles mentioned. That's where we should worry. If productivity in agriculture is going the wrong direction, then there's something wrong going on, then structural transformation is not done. So I think that the conceptual issue of agricultural transformation and its relationship with the broader structural transformation could be clarified as the paper is finalized. And the final conceptual question is on the disaggregation. The data is very aggregated. Of course, this is a paper about Africa, so it kind of makes sense. But when you talk about almost any of the the topics covered in the paper, the reader may feel a little frustrated that he or she doesn't get the information for a particular type of country. You talk about debt, for instance, just pick one example. Well, debt level may be very high in one country, but for good reasons. And the debt level may be also high in another country for bad reasons. So if your debt level is high because you are borrowing money at reasonable terms in a very transparent way to finance productive infrastructure, well, that's not necessarily a bad thing. But if you're borrowing money and your debt is getting high because you need to finance salaries or consumption expenditure, then that's a problem there. So this may be additional work, but I think it might be good to have some country groupings, some disaggregation in terms of the data. I mentioned debt, but I could say almost anything which is covered in the paper. But the paper will still be about Africa, but you may have, I don't know, resource-rich countries, or landlocked countries, or coastal countries, or whatever, beyond the traditional regional disaggregation. And now, the final part of my comment: what role for macroeconomic policy? I may not have time to go through the four points that I have, but let me start with the fiscal, because macroeconomic policy typically, at least in the African context, is fiscal policy and then monetary policy. And then of course you can add trade or so on, or financial, but it's typically fiscal and monetary. So let me pick fiscal. I agree with the paper and the presentation that there have been an urban bias against agriculture, that there's been too many distortions. The poor peasants of Africa have been taxed too much, so that the people living in urban areas who are politically more vocal can have infrastructure or good schools or water or things that other places in the country, in countryside don't have. So there's been an issue there, and of course the taxation in Africa for agriculture needs to be reviewed. Now, infrastructure is the other part of fiscal policy. I mean, expenditure in general, but infrastructure in particular is the other aspect of fiscal policy, which I want to say one word about, which is that to me, it's important to advise policymakers in Africa that at this level of development, they will never have all the funding that they need to finance all the infrastructure that they need. And what has been done throughout human history in places where economic policy has succeeded has been to be very careful about the targeting. What kind of infrastructure for which particular sector and where should they be located? The problem very often is that these decisions are made by political leaders and politicians who are politically interested. So they want to build infrastructure where there are political returns, political benefits, and which are not necessarily the places where this infrastructure will get the highest returns. Well, I think that the public conversation on the selection of infrastructure, the targeting of infrastructure, including in agriculture, needs to be more honest, to educate people to say, what Deng Xiaoping used to say in China, that everybody should accept that some regions should be given priorities, because that's where you can have the biggest bang for your bucks very quickly. On monetary policy, it may be the area where I was expecting a little more from the paper, especially because one of the co-authors is a former central bank governor of Kenya. The paper discusses inflation, the high inflation in some countries, in many countries in Africa, which is true. But if you look at the main reason for the high inflation in most of Africa, the two biggest components are food and energy. Food and energy costs are typically the highest, the most important factors for inflation in Africa. Well, and Africa is importing food. So we need more production of food. And the energy issue needs also to be resolved. And the central bank cannot do much about it, except, I believe, to advocate and recommend that we go back to one institution that many African countries used to have in the 60s and 70s, which is the development bank. I think that to finance food production in a very dynamic way, we need development banks. That's also true for infrastructure, because commercial banks and the current investment bank, the few that exist in Africa, cannot do it. And the central banks doesn't have the tool. So I think that we should put the creation or recreation of development banks on the table. We had them in the 60s and 70s. They were poorly managed for political reasons, and then we just threw away the baby with the bathwater. Well, it's an important institution, and I don't think that any country really has been able to finance infrastructure and economic transformation in general without development banks. The third point, and what should be the role of macro, is about trade. Well, here I would only say, in the interest of time, that we need to acknowledge that more regional integration is good in general, in the sense that getting rid of the barriers among our 54 or 55 economies. As I say 55 because the African Union lists 55 African countries and member states, and I don't want to get into political trouble. But we need to get rid of these barriers. And there's empirical work, some of which have been led by Dr. Abebe Shimeles, showing that if we could remove barriers within Africa, trade barriers, we could gain 2, 3, 4% of GDP every single year. Just by doing some basic things that do not cost money. But the other point I wanted to say about trade is the connection to global value chain, especially for agriculture. We are living in a world now where most trade in the world occurs within global value chains. Whether we like it or not, that's what is happening. So if that's the case, then we need to organize our farmers, our agricultural firms and institutions to be connected to global value chains. And here, I would be very open-minded to some particular policies that would even grant quotas in some of the spending that the government do every year to small and medium-sized enterprises operating in areas like agriculture, especially those led by women. I think that we should have, as a policy in many African countries, a particular percentage of public spending which is devoted to that. Of course, the way the allocation will take place will have to be very transparent to avoid the usual issues of corruption and governance. So that's basically what I wanted to say. I have a couple of technical things on the graphs that have been used, which I can share in parallel. I just found some of the data, the data set too small, and the correlation, the link, at least in the paper, the inference between correlation and causation being made perhaps too quickly, but these are minor points. So thank you very much. I'm sorry I've been beyond my 5 minutes.
Excellent, Prof.
This is such an exciting topic.
Thank you very much, and for your time. It was an exciting set of comments. I would like to probably mention here that the 8 out of 2015, I think, covers some of the issues on structural transformation and agricultural transformation that you raised. If you have time, so on the RESAC's website, you can take a look at that one, which was, I think the title was Towards a Middle Income Africa. So we looked at growth outlook and economic transformation in general. So you also referred to the global value chains and trade. We just launched in September the Africa Agricultural Trade Monitor, also available on the RESAC or AKADEMIYA2063 website. They'll provide additional food for thought on those very important questions that you raised. All right, so what I would do now, I will come back to you, John and Abebe for questions. Let me collect some from the audience, and while you answer to those questions, you can also react to some of the questions from Sam and from Celestine. So the floor is open now. And I will go through the list and look at the hands that are up. I know that some of you in the earlier session were sending your comments via email to me, so I'll be looking at my email in this session to get them. So let me go to Roman Malumelo for his comments or questions. If you can be brief, Roman, and others who will follow, so we can get as many people as possible into this round. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the opportunity, and thanks so much for the presentation. My question will go to Abebe. I think one of the interesting subjects you have presented, the role of public policies in agricultural food system transformation. And I was listening with great interest, but I've missed what I was looking to listen to in your paper. From experience in most of the African countries, there have been, a concern that radical overhaul reforms of the policies does not happen. Mostly it happens on the margin. You have hinted on some issues about subsidies. We have been with these subsidies for some time. Issues of balanced investments. And one of the reasons why such a radical transformation does not happen is because of the lack of balance between the technical objective direction of the policies versus the political imperative of the politicians to achieve what they promise in the agenda. From your study, what were the findings and where can we get the magic bullet so that we really drive this public policy transformation to drive agriculture transformation, which is a critical issue? Thank you.
Thank you, Roman. If I hear you acoustically, is how the balance of policies relates to structural transformation and what the gaps and weaknesses might be there. So maybe Abebe had also heard some other things which she can jot down while we are looking for the additional questions from the audience. Okay, so I haven't seen anything through the email. So what I would like to do, therefore, is get 3 more hands up here. Let me go to Sophia Molote first, and followed by Amadou Ndiaye. So Sophia, please, if you can be brief as well. Sophia, please. Okay, Sophia, we lost you. Oh, you're muted, Sophia. You need to unmute your mic. Do you want to unmute your mic, Sophia?
Hello.
Yeah, now we hear you. Please go ahead.
Yes, I have. Oh, okay, thank you very much. Yeah, I have been following up this conversation, and thank you very much for the good presentation. My question is, what do we do for agriculture transformation? Because to add up to what my colleague has raised is on the budgeting of agriculture activities. I think we agreed that all countries should set at least 10%. I don't know how this has been following it up, and I don't know how this study have been have come up with. What is the challenge? Is it a lack of seriousness, or is it a problem with the setting up the budget, or what is it? Because the bottom line I can see is the budget to make sure that agriculture is transformed in many cases. So I just wanted to see the bottom line, how the budget is faring for the agriculture transformation. Thank you.
Excellent. I think this is a good question for John to jot down. So how is public expenditure in agriculture proceeding, and what are the driving factors there? All right, let me go to Amadou Ndiaye also for a brief question before I go back to the authors. I'm going to take a couple more. Please, Mr. Ndiaye. Are you still there, Amadou Ndiaye?
Oui, je suis là, mais je ne vois pas.
Voilà, maintenant ça
Oui,
va.
bonjour.
On
En
vous
fait,
entend.
je voulais enchaîner très rapidement sur la question des politiques macroéconomiques. D'abord, la question des politiques, comment dirais-je, les politiques fiscales. Comment aujourd'hui intégrer fondamentalement la fiscalité des petites exploitations agricoles familiales? Ça, c'est important. Je pense aussi que dans les politiques macroéconomiques, surtout en Afrique française, en Afrique CEDEAO, j'allais dire en zone franc, on a un petit problème parce qu'on a une harmonisation des politiques, comment on appelle ça, monétaires. Mais au niveau des politiques budgétaires, je pense que c'est important d'insister parce qu'il y a une subvention très importante dans certains pays sur l'agriculture. Comment concilier dans les politiques budgétaires les subventions agricoles? Je pense que c'est un rôle important que les subventions jouent et comment définir des bonnes politiques budgétaires dans le cadre de ces politiques. Merci.
Very good. Thank you very much for Abebe. These two very important questions. How do you design conducive fiscal policies targeting smallholders? And a second, how do you go about harmonizing fiscal policies across countries so that you can do right by agriculture? So I'll take the last questions. I'm not sure, the name is not showing. It is Infinix Hot B or 8, whoever that is. If you would introduce yourself and take 1 minute to ask your brief questions, and then we move to the questions, please. Anybody with the acronym or name Infinix? Okay, so then let me go to the panelists, to the presenters to react. I think, John, there were a few comments by Sam on the choice of variables and interpretation of results in your presentation. And Abebe, you got the last one that came here about fiscal policy, but also the issue of structural transformation and agriculture sector transformation. So one, when is a low share of agriculture a concern and when it's not? And second, I think a question that we can also get from the interventions from Professor Celeste Monga is, debt itself is not bad. What is more important is the interface between debt and fiscal priorities and how you manage the debt and how you invest it. So let me start with John. John, if you can be brief, and then
Yes.
we go back to Abebe for his answers as well. Please, John.
Thank you, Usman, and thank you to Sam for his comment on the why we don't have we didn't report actions taken by stakeholders different from the government. It's just because the way the system is designed, as of now, we can only collect actions or data on state institutions and non-state actors. We don't have yet the capacity to collect information, but it's a good suggestion. On the empirical portion of the paper, I think we acknowledge the limits of the empirical implementation, and we are cautiously interpreting the results more in terms of correlation than causality. However, the sign of our coefficient and the significant are consistent. There is a typo in the report. I just shared the actual result with Sam. So we will correct the typo, but the sign that we are reporting, interpreting, are consistent with the result that we had. The question on the budget, someone asked, where does the budget for agriculture stand? My colleague Titi will come back on this one, but what I can say is that when we look at the period between 2014 and 2019, only 7 countries have met or surpassed the 10% budget allocation target. These are Burkina Faso, Ethiopia, Liberia, Malawi, Mali, Sierra Leone, and Senegal. So out of the 50 plus African countries, only 7 within that period of 2014 to 2019. So there are still a lot of work to do to get the country at least to hit the 10% budget allocation, the Malabo from the Malabo Declaration. Thank you.
Very good, John, and thank you for being concise. So let me then go to Abebe Shimeles to address some of the comments we got on fiscal policies and debt, and also structural transformation, agricultural transformation. Abebe, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair, and I really thank also Professor Celeste Monga, under whom I have worked in not too distant past. So I can see that if I stimulated his interest, it means we have also done a bit of good work. So I appreciate his comments. So just for the benefit of the discussion, yes, he's right in saying that our statistics on sectoral contributions are not detailed enough to see the continuum between agriculture and industry. In a sense that when we say agriculture, of course, food processing and related allied activities are hidden in the aggregated macro data. So that is not it. Still, we work with those limitations. However, I mean, as I have tried to argue, of course, that component of the processed component of agricultural goods in Africa are still quite low. I mean, at least in many parts of the continent. In terms of conceptualizing structural transformation, indeed, the focus is on productivity. So that is another way of talking about the same thing. What I have tried to show in this graph in a rather simpler way is that even though we have seen a steady decline in the share of employment in agriculture from about, I think, 70% in the early years to the recent one, around 45%. The share to GDP, however, really plummeted significantly to 17% in 2018. That can only be explained by the low productivity growth in agriculture, part of it. So conceptually, what we want to see in agriculture is continued increase in output per worker, which can also facilitate the process of structural transformation within the sector, because that is enabled through increased capital investment, technology, market development, etc. I also acknowledge, of course, in the paper, we need to acknowledge the heterogeneity within Africa. It's not one country, it's a collection of 54 countries with a lot of differences, significant differences. I think where we could, we were able to use country level data actually, but to show some patterns and correlations, we just used the cross-country data. Of course, I mean, I acknowledge fully we need to be very, very cautious about the interpretation of correlations. So the endogeneity part is well acknowledged. What we've tried actually is really, these are kind of snapshots showing some degree of a correlation that you don't want, you would not really want to see. For instance, the debt and agricultural productivity correlation. Yes, I mean, when you break it down and go deeper, debt in its own is not bad. But then if it is conceivable, if it is the case that slow growing agriculture can also make governments to continuously borrow to meet their demand for food, that's not something you want to see. I mean, yes, we need to do more work, but we were saying it may suggest the possibility that countries that have really low agricultural productivity tend to borrow a lot, indicates it is possible. I mean, it's not there in the paper, but it is conceivable to think the excess demand is met by borrowing. And many countries, I mean, if you look at the breakdown for food security and food imports, many countries really do rely on borrowing to import food. Anyway, but I also acknowledge we need to really show this, otherwise we need to be careful. Very important point also I noted from his intervention, which is very good, is the political economy side of macroeconomic policy, where the urban bias generally is understood to be driven more by the influence that the urban sector may have on the political process in many African countries. So this also goes to the question raised by Roman about this transformation in public policy making from politics to technocratism, which means we know what needs to be done, but oftentimes we don't do them. So this is a very important observation. So finally, I think these are very important comments. Yes, Celestin also mentioned we should have talked a lot more about how central banks generally need to be proactive in managing relative prices within a country, so that the agriculture sector inflation is not at the expense of the rural economy or the agricultural economy. I think in the paper also we tried to give a few examples and the patterns of inflation, but I also want to echo what Usman, you have mentioned earlier. Overall, when you look at macroeconomic policy making in Africa, you have two imperatives. One is the stability side of it, and the other is the growth promotion part of it. And most of our finance ministers and central bankers tend to focus more on gaining macroeconomic stability without really looking at the consequences on longer-term growth. So probably I think one way is they need to find a way to reconcile that this effort to focus on stabilizing the economy, if it has to be fine-tuned so that it will not also affect future growth, especially agriculture. Usually that is a sector that suffers. Say, for instance, if you are a finance minister and you have to cut a budget, it's easier for us to start first with agriculture instead of defense, or instead of security, or instead of other sectors, especially also with the capital budget, where a lot we have seen of the budget was cut, for instance, that goes to extension services, to the importation of fertilizers, etc. And another issue where we have not touched, but very, very important, is also the oligopoly.
Just 30 more seconds, Abebe, is that okay?
Yeah. Just maybe we have also where it concerns also Celestine's point is the input prices for agriculture. We have not touched on that one, and I think I acknowledge that is an important part where the farmers, because of oligopoly market in the inputs, fertilizer, and all of this, in many countries tend to pay more than they should, so that affects profitability and also all these things. Thank you very much. So
thank you very much. Thank you very much, Abebe. We have come to the end of this session. Join me again for a round of applause for our two presenters, John Mwenge and Abebe, and of course our first-rate commentators or discussants, Samuel Benin and Celestine Monga. So thank you to all, and also thank you to those who have asked their questions. Sorry we couldn't accommodate everybody. We went a bit beyond our time here. Team, do you have any announcement for the audience before we close for the day today? Nabu?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Nancy is going to make an announcement for the symposiums tomorrow.
Okay,
the link
please,
will be shared in the chat.
All right, thank you, Nancy. Nancy, you got the floor. Are you ready?
Yes, I'm ready. Sorry, I was.
Okay. We don't hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, now we can hear you, please.
All right, thank you. So I was saying that regarding the symposia for tomorrow, the parallel symposia, the link will be shared in the chat box and you will receive it by email during the day today. That is for those who haven't registered yet. Okay,
by email today.
Yes.
Okay, or they can access in the chat box. Okay, very good. So this is really important. So 2 symposiums tomorrow. We would like to have you choose which symposium you would like to go to. And if you do it earlier, that will facilitate the logistics for us to send you the appropriate link for the symposium of your choice. So thank you very much to everybody. Thank you to those who have joined us today. I hope you'll be joining us tomorrow and for the last day on Thursday. All right, back to you, Nabwe, and your team. I think we will then see everybody tomorrow at 9, tomorrow at 7 o'clock, 7 a.m. same time tomorrow, 7 Eastern US, Eastern Standard Time of the US, 12 GMT, and 15 hours Eastern African Time. So right, you take care, all of you, and thank you, and catch up tomorrow. Bye-bye.